My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 401 Religious Courts. The pagans of Germany and France are of Jewish descent. Those Spanish ministers who were happy were those who believed in Catholicism. Naturally, they hated the Huguenots from France, that is, the Calvinists in history textbooks, and the Protestants in Germany. As for the ministers from the Netherlands, although they still believed in Catholicism, deep down they yearned for Protestantism, and naturally sympathized with Calvinism and other Protestantism. The so-called Jews were again charged by Philip II. Although in the eyes of Philip II, heresies are more hateful than heretics. Heresies can shake the foundation of his rule, but heresies are helpful to his rule. However, in the eyes of ordinary people and those who are not religious, Protestants are disgusting, but they are still acceptable. And as a devout Catholic, of course I hate Judaism, the heathen, and the Jews. Therefore, Philip II arranged all the heretics and heresies on those Protestants at one time, naturally wanting to occupy the commanding heights of propaganda and gain the support of more ministers and nobles, as well as the support of the common people. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Those ministers who sympathized with the Protestantism hurriedly bent down and said hastily, calling His Majesty constantly in their mouths, with eagerness on their faces. The Catholics, on the other hand, watched with cold eyes, standing on the spot one by one, with expressionless faces, and some even showed joyful expressions. Queen Mary showed a puzzled look, looking at her husband and ministers with different expressions in front of her, feeling very puzzled. Needless to say, the Netherlands has been defiled, and Spain cannot continue. This beautiful land cannot be defiled by heretics. But Philip II didn't care about the persuasion of so many ministers. The expression on his face was very cold, even a little cold. He said loudly, in spite of everything, at present, only God can judge these sinners. Amen. His Majesty the King began to pray, and the ministers were no exception. No matter how good or bad they were, they could only get up and follow the prayer afterwards. His Majesty the King and the ministers began to walk towards the palace. Along the way, some ministers were bitter and depressed. They are all old ministers. Of course they know that the current His Majesty is about to use an institution, the Inquisition, and those workers didn't know that what awaited them in Spain next would be a bloodbath. The Inquisition was an institution used by the Christian Church to detect and try heresy from the 13th to the 19th century. Also translated Inquisition Trial Office, Inquisition Tribunal, aiming at all anti-ecclesiastical heresies, and those with heretical ideas. The Inquisition was established from the first half of the 13th century. In order to suppress the Albigensian heresy in southern France, Pope Innocent III established the Church's investigative and judicial institutions, which was the origin of the Inquisition. When they hear about the Inquisition, everyone must be terrified, and their minds are full of various tortures, as well as random arrests of various women, false accusations of witches, various tortures, and even the capture of scientists and the death penalty in modern times. But it is interesting that until 1530 the Spanish Inquisition was universally praised as the best and most humane court in Europe. In fact, there are records of Spanish criminals deliberately committing acts of blasphemy in order to be transferred to the prisons of the Spanish Inquisition. However, after 1530, the Spanish Inquisition began to turn its attention to the new heresy Lutheranism, and the misperception about it may be precisely derived from the Protestant Revolution and the ensuing hostility between Protestantism and Catholicism. State at that time, Protestant countries had printing presses, so they naturally slandered the Inquisitions in Spain and France, and controlled the power of public opinion, which created the current impression. In fact, I also wrote in the previous article that in Europe in the 16th century, a wave of witches swept the world, and various countries burned and killed witches, and many innocent women were implicated. In France and Spain, where there are densely populated religious inquisitions, the inquisitions have absolute professionalism. They carefully reviewed the witches and found that most of them were fake, which saved many lives. And those countries without the Inquisition, on the contrary, burned and killed witches, such as England. However, it is undeniable that the Spanish Inquisition faithfully implemented the orders of His Majesty the King, and still imposed severe punishments on Protestants and heretics. Moreover, the Inquisition has a great reputation in Spain in dealing with heretics, and even ministers and nobles still have lingering fears about it. That's why those ministers pleaded so, because once the Inquisition is activated, at least hundreds of thousands of people will suffer throughout Spain. However, Philip II didn't seem to listen, and he still received the Archbishop of Spain immediately in order to cooperate with the Inquisition. Then, Cavalry from all over the country flew in all directions, and the Inquisitions, large and small, all over Spain received the king's order and started their work. On the streets of Madrid, Hugo is an inconspicuous small vendor on the streets of Madrid. He usually sells small daily commodities and supports himself and his family. Compared with other Spaniards, he barely has enough food and clothing. On this day, the sun exhausted all his strength, spreading the last warmth in his body, and the sky turned gray. Seeing the scattered pedestrians on the street, Hugo knew that there was no business today and it was time to go home. As soon as he wanted to go home, the image of his 14-year-old son with a tiger head and a tiger head flashed in his mind, and he was mixed for a while. The child is 14 years old, and it's time to find him a wife, but the situation in my own family is still very tight, and I can barely support 3 people. If I add one more, I'm afraid I will faint from hunger. Thinking of this, Hugo glanced at the patrolling soldiers, and cursed in his heart, "Damn the tax collector, the damned king, collecting so much tax just to build a palace, regardless of the lives of us civilians at all. If, as priest Alfonso said, everyone was Protestant, my son would surely be able to marry a wife." He shook his head vigorously, sobered up, and then staggered home with his load on his shoulders. However, as soon as he arrived at the door of his house, suddenly, several gray-robed monks and a dozen soldiers appeared beside him. Seeing the gray-robed monks and soldiers, Hugo quickly lowered his head, trying to sneak into the house, but this time, the gray-robed man walked over directly and arrived in front of him. One of the gray-robed monks was completely covered in the gray robe, and he couldn't see his face, but there was a gloomy voice from inside, "Hugo, you heretic who betrayed my lord, you betrayer. You are about to be judged by my lord." Hearing this, as a native of Madrid, Hugo's legs softened immediately, his eyelids turned white, and his crotch was obviously yellow and white, and he fell down immediately. He knew that he was in great trouble. Chapter 402 Cabinet Meeting. Such scenes began to be staged all over Spain. Inquisitions, large and small, began to move around to try heresy and maintain the glory of God. This action has deep political intentions. Everyone must remember that every action of the government is not because of the king's whims or selfishness, but with deep intentions. This was the case with Philip II. What he wanted was to use a religious trial to maintain his rule, embody the dignity of the king, and let all the nobles know that Spain ushered in a new king. Obviously, tens of thousands of people across the country were arrested at the same time, which shocked the whole Spanish atmosphere. The Pope, who was far away in Rome, also sent a congratulatory message, praising Philip II's behavior of defending God in England. After almost a year of adjustments, the nascent United Kingdom is finally slowly running London, Palace of Westminster, United Kingdom Cabinet. As the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, William Celsey sat in his own seat and listened carefully to the discussions of the ministers. This is a cabinet meeting that is held every day, and the discussions are all about unresolved proposals and some policies with relatively large objections, which need to be resolved together as a cabinet, except for the Prime Minister and the nominal Deputy Prime Minister. All the ministers are responsible for specific matters, and then submit the proposal to the Prime Minister. After the Prime Minister discusses it with his staff, if he agrees, he will transfer the document to the Palace Affairs Office. The Palace Affairs Office will transfer it to the King, and it can only be implemented after the King approves it. Under the Cabinet, Prime Minister and Civil Leader, coordinating the Cabinet and leading Cabinet Ministers. Minister of War, responsible for communication between the government and the army, and for national war mobilization. Chancellor of the Exchequer, responsible for the government budget and taxation. Home Secretary, leads and commands the national police, and is responsible for a range of security matters, such as fire prevention, riot prevention, etc. Minister of Foreign Affairs, responsible for the kingdom's foreign affairs. Minister of Transport, responsible for a series of matters such as roads, ports, and rivers. Minister of Civil Affairs, responsible for the promotion and demotion of county chiefs and central officials in the kingdom. Minister of Education, responsible for civil service selection examinations and leadership of the National Institute of Education. Minister of Trade, responsible for domestic and foreign commercial trade matters. Keeper of the Seal, the King's observer in the Cabinet, responsible for supervising the Cabinet, recording Cabinet discussions, and reporting to the King. Minister of England, responsible for England affairs, served by the Speaker of the Privy Council of England, actually concurrently held by the Prime Minister. Scottish Minister, responsible for Scottish affairs, concurrently held by the Scottish Consul. Minister of Ireland, responsible for Irish colonization and governance, concurrently served by the Governor of Ireland. Minister of Wales, responsible for regional affairs in Wales, held by the Welsh Governor. Minister of France, responsible for the cities of Boulogne and Calais, which belong to the French region of course. In the enlarged meeting, there are also judges of the Supreme United Court, the Palace Office, the Army and Navy, and members of the major parliaments. Generally speaking, the ministers of the other three regions basically only govern in their jurisdictions. Only on December 8th of each year, when they return to London, the cabinet holds an enlarged meeting. The enlarged meeting is presided over by the king and the prime minister. Regional leaders conduct a one-year political report, followed by a political report by the prime minister of the kingdom, and regional ministers also need to consult with the cabinet to engage in a tug-of-war for the budget for the coming year. The central government uses finances, and the king uses the army to control major regions. In this cabinet meeting plus the prime minister's words, there were a total of 10 people at a long table. The prime minister sat at the head seat, while the keeper of the seal, who was in charge of supervision, sat opposite and began to take a pen and record. Minister of Trade, how is the tax rate table? Prime Minister William Celsey glanced at the ministers and asked first. The tax rate table is the tax basis list for various tax types and goods carried out by the state, and is the basis for national fiscal taxation. The Minister of Trade is a skinny man. Because of thinning hair and wearing a wig, he looks a little sluggish. Obviously, he is very tired these days, Your Excellency Prime Minister, due to the refusal of His Majesty the King last time. After a week of recalculation by the Ministry of Trade, we have finally obtained His Majesty's approval. Here is our tax rate table. As he said that, the secretary at the side handed the tax rate table to William. His Excellency the Prime Minister read it, and then passed it on in turn, and all the ministers read it one by one. Since this is the case, do you have any objections? If not, please submit it to the Palace Affairs Office. Your Excellency the Prime Minister glanced at the ministers and said softly, we have no objection. The ministers said in unison, in that case, let's start the next topic. The Prime Minister continued loudly, His Majesty the King requested that the cabinet add another minister, the colonial minister, to be responsible for the kingdom's external expansion and the colonial movement in the New World. Do you have any objections? The ministers looked at each other, discussed in a low voice, and after finding that nothing harmed their own interests, they agreed in unison. Next topic, expanding the Irish colonial movement. Your Excellency, it seems that the Minister of Ireland hasn't arrived yet. The Minister of Finance on the side quickly reminded, it's nothing, the Minister of Ireland has sent a message and agreed, and now we are asking for everyone's opinions. William glanced at the agitated Minister of the Exchequer, and said loudly, however, the kingdom's finances have been aiding Ireland for 1 year in a row, and coupled with the construction of national roads throughout the kingdom, the finances are already overwhelmed. The Minister of Finance complained bitterly also, in terms of civil servants, I haven't prepared so many officials. As he spoke, he winked at the Minister of Civil Affairs, implying, haha. Sir Anthony, don't worry, our civil service department has already started preparations for half a year, which is completely enough for Ireland's next expansion. The Minister of Civil Affairs seemed to have not seen the hint, and said a word leisurely, completely shattering the hopes of the Minister of Finance. The other ministers immediately laughed, and for a moment, the entire meeting room was filled with joy. Even so, but, Your Excellency the Prime Minister, there is really nothing financial can do to postpone it for a year. Sir Anthony's face became more bitter, and he looked at the Prime Minister pleadingly. Sir Anthony, I sympathize with the situation of the Ministry of Finance, but the second step of Ireland's expansion is a policy set by His Majesty the King. Please forgive me for being powerless. In this regard, William could only look at the Chancellor of the Exchequer sympathetically, and said softly, in this way. The Minister of Finance shook his head helplessly. Alice. It depends on the situation. For the current plan, we can only make loans and borrow debts. The rest of the ministers felt sympathy when they saw this scene. Originally sent the wrong content. Refill Chapter 403 Annual Summary. The contents of the cabinet meeting arrived on Edward's table immediately, and the young His Majesty the King glanced at it, then smiled and said nothing. Let them handle the affairs of the coalition government themselves. The first person in charge is the Prime Minister, and he only needs to control the overall situation so that the cabinet does not lose its control. Borrowing debts is also a matter for the government, not the King's business anymore, and the King can no longer mortgage the Crown for loans in the UK. Thinking of this, Edward is not very complacent from then on. The coalition government is a good thing to take the blame for. If something goes wrong, the cabinet will be dismissed and the Prime Minister will be reappointed. How could His Majesty go wrong? It's all the fault of the ministers. It's all the fault of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. His Majesty the King has always been wise and brave, smart and brave, and he is like the wind, thinking like this. Time passed quietly. On December 8, 1556, the meeting hall belonging to the cabinet in the Palace of Westminster seemed a bit crowded at this time. In addition to the permanent cabinet ministers, several ministers from as far away as Ireland, Scotland, and Wales have already arrived to participate in the enlarged cabinet meeting. In addition, the judges of the Supreme United Court, the Speaker of the English Parliament, the Speaker of the Irish Parliament, the Speaker of the Welsh Assembly, the Deputy Speaker of the Army Command Committee, and the Deputy Speaker of the Navy Committee all came to observe. Of course, as the host of this meeting, His Majesty the Great King also participated, mainly to review the 4 major regions and the government of the United Kingdom. Of course, this is also the first enlarged meeting of the Cabinet of the United Kingdom. Everyone is very formal and serious. Edward sat on the main seat, his face remained unchanged, and he looked indifferent, which made the ministers somewhat unable to see through his thoughts. The first one to do the report work, it can be seen that he is still a little nervous. Your Majesty, and ministers, on behalf of England, I would like to make a summary of the year here. William first bowed respectfully towards Edward, then saluted the other ministers, and then read the manuscript aloud. After a year of governance, the total population of England has reached about 3.18 million, and nearly £100,000 of taxes have been paid for the entire United Kingdom. In the next year, we are sure to make persistent efforts, continue to contribute to the United Kingdom, and continue to serve His Majesty the King, according to the model of splitting accounts in half. After a year, the tax revenue of the central government of England will reach £200,000, and the tax revenue of central England will be divided into 70 and 30, so England's annual tax revenue will be close to £300,000. As soon as William Celsey's remarks came out, the ministers were in an uproar. England was indeed the richest region in the entire United Kingdom. Such a large population creates unrivaled tax revenue. The following detailed introduction, everyone just listened to it, and started talking in low voices one by one. Afterwards, the Earl of Argyll, the Minister of State for Scotland, spoke to Edward's second levy on Scotland. He finally took the taxation into his hands, and also into the hands of the coalition government. In his speech, he said that Scotland has a population of 950,000, contributes £60,000 in taxes, and has been building national roads and religious reforms in the country. Finally, he hopes that the central government can provide more financial support. Hearing this, Sir Anthony, the Minister of Finance, immediately twisted his nose in anger. If His Majesty the King hadn't been in front, he might beat him up next. The ruling Heiress of Wales and Thomas Mayne, the Governor of Ireland, also made their own reports. The total population of Wales is only 380,000, and if the Irish area includes immigrants, the actual controlled population is only 160,000. Wales paid £30,000 in taxes, while Ireland paid nothing. Instead, they put on a pitiful appearance and called on the central government to allocate funds for the next round of colonial expansion. In this regard, Sir Anthony, the Minister of Finance, had an ugly face, without a smile, and was obviously in a hurry. Together, the 4 major regions paid a total of £190,000 in taxes, and the actual controlled population was 4.57 million. Hundreds of thousands more than originally estimated. It can be seen that it has only been 5 or 6 years since there was peace, and the growth rate of the population is astonishing. After the report, Edward gave some encouragement and looked forward to the bright future of the United Kingdom. The first enlarged meeting of the cabinet was announced to be dissolved next. The Supreme United Court, the Navy, the Army, and the Minister of Royal Affairs, as well as the Guards, all reported face-to-face to the King alone. In terms of the Army, the entire United Kingdom Army carried out selective recruitment last year, and the number of the standing army in the entire kingdom reached 15,000 soldiers. Among them, 5,000 were stationed in England, 5,000 in Scotland, 3,000 in Ireland, and 2,000 in Wales. Moreover, the army has been training and often conducts actual combat exercises, and the musket rate has reached 30%, which means that the United Kingdom has close to 5,000 musketeers. The reason why there are only 5,000 people in England is because there are still nearly 6,000 guards suppressing them. If they are added together, the army troops belonging to the King in the entire United Kingdom have reached more than 20,000. In terms of the Navy, the number of people can exceed 3,000, and there are more than 150 warships. Currently, they have been building large warships and recruiting sailors combined. The Navy and the Army cost £120,000 a year. This does not count the tens of thousands of pounds that the royal family supports the Navy with shipbuilding, or even more. No wonder the United Kingdom's finances are about to go bankrupt. The Supreme United Court reported that in the United Kingdom, the number of people sentenced to death in 1 year has reached 1,865 people, and 950 people have been approved to execute the death penalty by the Palace Office. In the next year, the number of executions is likely to be on a downward trend. Edward has nothing to do about this. The scum deserves to die. He will not let these scum go to the colony. Even if they go, they will be troublemakers in the future. Refer to the beautiful and forgive His Majesty the King for being so straightforward. Next, the guards had nothing to say, but they eliminated a small number of infantry and replaced them with cavalry. With nearly 6,000 guards, the number of cavalry reached 3,000, musketeers 2,000, and infantry 1,000. That's all. Finally, Sir John, the Minister of Royal Affairs, finally brought good news to His Majesty Edward. Your Majesty, last year, the entire royal family, the territories and manors including the Duke of Lancaster and the United Kingdom, brought you a total of £200,000 in income, commercially, trade in taverns, and selling wine on the one hand. It will bring an income of £360,000 to the royal family. On the colonial side, the Irish region will bring you £13,000 income. So, with the addition of some shops and real estate, the annual income of the royal family has reached £740,000. With such a huge income data, Edward's heart trembled. Don't worry about taverns and wine sales, they have been selling well. In terms of territory, the dukedoms, a large number of manors, and the property of the Scottish royal family have contributed less than 200,000 yuan, and since they got the Spanish market, the tariffs that belonged exclusively to the royal family increased most rapidly. But to Edward's delight, the Irish side, having invested so many years and almost £200,000 back and forth, finally has money back. So exciting. But, Your Majesty the King, Sir John's but makes the heart beat faster. Chapter 404 Royal Bill. Such a huge income really made Edward very happy. Compared with France's income of £1 million, it is naturally relatively small, but compared with the income of the royal family in previous years, it is a big step forward. Moreover, this is a normal income. In the next few years, if there is no accident, this standard will still be maintained, and it will even increase. More importantly, the royal family got rid of the big burden of the government. In other words, if there is a war in the future, or when a riot is suppressed, the king no longer needs to borrow money hard. Of course, the benefits obtained will naturally be reduced, but the king leads the government and the army. Although the benefits are less, at least they should be shared equally with the government. But, my lord, Sir John said dryly, frowning, last year, the guards spent nearly £50,000 on increasing horses, daily training, and ordinary expenses. The palace guards and maids, the palace office, and the daily expenses of the royal family have reached £80,000. Court expenses amounted to £80,000, which did not surprise Edward. Not to mention anything else, the price of the ordinary clothes he wears every day is more than £100, and the dresses for banquets and ceremonies are even more than £1,000. Compared with his father Henry VIII, the annual court expenditure reached more than £100,000. At that time, the entire England only had an income of about £200,000. Half of the income was spent by the court. How could the rest support the war? Wool and cloth. Therefore, after the Reformation, the church's religious property was sold off wantonly. In addition, the land lost during the Reformation originally occupied 1/3 of England's religious property. When Edward came to the throne, it was less than 1/10. On the original royal land, the Tudor royal family only managed to control 1/10 of England's land. Although some of these diasporas went to the hands of the nobles, most of them went to the hands of the common people. As a result, a new class was born in England, the country gentry group, that is, the class of small and medium landlords, and the big landlords are noble knights. They are the elites of the country and the mainstay of society. Although 1/10 does not seem like much, it is still a huge number. That is to say, England has a population of 4 million, and a royal family is equivalent to 400,000, but if you look at it from the United Kingdom, the royal family occupies 1/5 of the entire United Kingdom, almost half of Scotland's church estates and royal territories. Wales is the royal land, and of course Ireland. The royal family automatically occupies 1/3 of the colonial land. Edward can proudly announce loudly that the Tudor royal family is the royal family with the most land in Europe. Of course, the richest is the Spanish royal family. Thinking of this, Edward couldn't help feeling proud for the Navy. We will support £30,000 a year for new ships and recruit sailors, and, according to the usual practice, The salaries of the cabinet, the Supreme United Court, and the Command Committee of the Navy and Army are all paid by the royal family, so the annual expenditure reaches £10,000. Edward felt that the royal family should still pay the salaries of the cabinet, the Supreme Court, and senior officials of the Navy and Army. In this way, these people are still royal employees in name, increasing their loyalty to the royal family. The Dark Blade and the Palace Intelligence Service, as well as the Star Chamber Court, together spend a total of £80,000 every year to maintain their operations. Hearing this, Edward was also inexplicably surprised. Together, the two intelligence agencies and the most violent judiciary dogleg Star Chamber swallowed £80,000 a year, which was almost half a year's tax revenue for the United Central Government. But this is an institution to maintain the rule, the eyes and ears of the royal family, and suitable thugs, but it has to run, and the huge cost can only smash teeth and swallow it in the stomach. The judiciary, including the local courts and the Central Supreme Court, in addition to returning the £50,000 they turned in, the royal family subsidized an additional £70,000. When Edward heard this, he naturally felt a little regretful, but he had to do it. The judiciary is independent of the government and controlled by the royal family, which is also one of the necessary means for Edward to control the entire United Kingdom. Relying on the military and financial institutions alone is still not safe. By the way, my sir, what's the current situation in the judiciary? Edward looked at Sir John, who was eloquent with some embarrassment, and asked softly. When the Supreme Court first reported to him, he didn't listen carefully, and now he is a little embarrassed to ask questions. But he is the king. What are you afraid of, Your Majesty? At present, the whole of England is covered with large and small courts, and the number has reached more than 500. The exact number is still unknown. Sir John glanced curiously at. However, I estimate that the number will still increase. Also, my lord, the current number of court employees has reached more than 3,600, and the fines they imposed are not enough to pay their salaries. I think the subsidy of the royal family will increase a lot in the next few years. As soon as he said this, Sir John poured out bitter water. Your Majesty, do you want the court to reduce some, or ask them to stop increasing the number of courts? As he said that, Sir John leaned over with a shy face and came up with a bad idea. No, the number of courts cannot be reduced, and the judicial power must be completely taken from those nobles and gentry. Edward rejected the bad idea without even thinking about it. Go on, sir. Edward interrupted Sir John's desire to continue pestering. Yes, Your Majesty. Sir John continued to report the bill with a bitter face. The Moscow Company was established. The royal family contributed £20,000. The orphan camp last year spent £30,000, and other expenses £20,000. Last year, the royal family's total income was £740,000, expenditure was £370,000, and the actual income was £370,000. In the end, as soon as the number came out, Edward began to relax in his heart. Is this the point? A surplus of £370,000 equivalent to 2 years' income of the Central United Kingdom, is indeed a large sum. However, if you keep the money in your hands and don't spend it, you are a bastard. An extra £20,000 for the Navy, and £20,000 for the Army to improve food. Edward was happy when he had money, but he felt sad if he didn't spend money on deal, so Sir John could only hold a pen and record with a sad face. Also, donate £10,000 to Oxford University and Cambridge University next year, and increase support to Ireland next year. The amount, then, His Majesty the King waved his hand and said, the amount should be £50,000. Also, if the coalition government borrows money in the future, it will eat half of it. Half. That's right, it's half. I want the coalition government to owe me money. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405. A letter from London. My dear brother, today I disembarked and came to London, the capital of the newly formed United Kingdom. Just disembarked. Everything here is amazing, amazing. I can't imagine it. It is completely different from the Netherlands. I saw that in a hotel. A young man with a thin figure, listless, and looking a little tired was sitting by the window patiently, writing earnestly on the desk. The Latin letters danced on the clean and unbelievably clean white paper. Wilson sat in the house he rented, looking out the window, feeling the exotic atmosphere, and all the fatigue from his body dissipated for a while. Sniffing the mist drifting in the air, he picked up the specially bought soft bread beside him, took a hard bite, and continued to write with a pen what I'm going to write next. I'm afraid you still can't believe it. Thinking that I'm just swimming in a dream, but, my brother, your brother has never deceived you, and today is even less. I just got off the boat and came to a pier, when mentioning the docks, the dirty docks in the Netherlands, large and small, and the completely different docks in London came to Wilson's mind, forming a clear contrast in his mind. I'm afraid you can't believe it. The pier here is extremely neat and clean. There is no horse manure and all kinds of garbage that are common everywhere. There are not even thieves wandering around trying to empty our pockets of silver coins, let alone showing a vicious look. The gangster who tried to drag you around the corner to rob, guess what I saw? People in strange uniforms were constantly patrolling the pier. I later learned that they were the police at the pier. People in the same strange clothes were holding brooms throughout the pier. Keep cleaning the garbage. Don't let go of a corner. The whole pier looks so clean and tidy. I think this has a lot to do with them. It makes me more like who made this wise system, and those workers in short shirts were commanded by the leader in an orderly manner, and they boarded the ship to load and unload goods in turn. There was no fight or noise here, and everyone was so orderly and efficient, and what caught my eye was that when I got out of the pier, rows of carriages were parked outside, waiting for outsiders like me. I saw that others got into the carriage without worry, so I also went up in fear. After I told a destination, the carriage quickly sent me to this inn, and I only charged 2 pence. I was about to bleed. Who knew what would happen? I asked him why he only charged so little. He told me that this was the price set by the coach shop, 1 penny per mile. I couldn't help admiring the coach shop. If this were in the Netherlands, I wouldn't be able to ride without a silver coin. Watching the fog outside the window gradually dissipate, revealing the figures of pedestrians, the carriages rushing past, the cheerful sound of children playing, and the cries of hawkers, constitute an intoxicating picture. I don't know the exact number in London, but according to the innkeeper, the entire city of London already has a population of nearly 200,000. By the way, I just arrived at the hotel. Even though I took out the room number plate you booked, the boss still didn't let me in, saying that I need an ID card. This baffled me. After some explanations from the boss, I realized that everyone in England has their own ID card, and the boss even showed me his ID card. Exclamation mark. After writing here, he stopped writing, recalled it carefully, and then continued. The identity card is made of wood wrapped with a layer of iron sheet, which records a person's physical characteristics and identity information, such as the date of birth and home address, which is really eye-catching. The boss said that those who do not have an ID card must go to the BHU office to register within a week to get a temporary ID card, otherwise they will not be able to stay in the store or go out, and they may be taken by the police at any time and deported from England. This kind of identity card was originally available in England, and now I heard that other parts of the United Kingdom are also planning to implement it. Although I don't know what it is useful for, it is indeed a troublesome thing. Under the leadership of my boss, I spent a penny to apply for a paper-like residence permit that lasts half a year. If I want to stay here, I must find a job within half a year. Then you will be deported. Everything on the streets of London is flat, and all the houses seem to obey certain regulations. On the opposite side of the street, they are almost the same. There are no protruding parts. I heard that this is also required by the government. Pedestrians on the street are always in a hurry and walk fast, but their clothes look neat and clean, so the streets and alleys of London look so pleasing to the eye. While I was out wandering, I saw something unique to England, a stagecoach, a huge, large carriage driven by several horses, with wheels pressed against a specific track. This carriage can hold 10 or 20 people at a time. Anyone can board, and it only costs 1 penny, no matter where it goes. I took it once, but it was too crowded, and it may be a popular route that I happen to board. Although it's cheap and convenient, in my opinion, only ordinary commoners would sit, the rich and the aristocrats, but disdain it. Such a smell of sweat, I really don't want to try it again. As he writes this, Wilson seems to feel that some of this smell remains in his nose, which makes him want to vomit. In my opinion, the whole of London is the epitome of England, and even the United Kingdom. It states the fact that the government has great power. In this way, it can be proved that I was right to come to England. After passing the so-called official selection test, becoming an official is indeed a shortcut. However, if you want to take the exam, you must believe in Anglicanism, which is the so-called state religion of the United Kingdom. This is a bit troublesome. However, I have long been disgusted with Catholicism. It is not difficult to accept converting to Anglicanism. As for the Lutheranism you believe in, I am afraid it will be difficult for me to follow. Finally, your brother Wilson, I give you a sincere advice, my brother, transfer the family business to England. The current turmoil in the Netherlands is already predictable. The tyrant has dealt with Spain, and it is impossible to let it go. Netherlands, your brother Wilson. Chapter 406 Missionaries in the Port. Devon, Plymouth, the port city. Due to the prosperity of commerce and the intensification of commercial exchanges between the Netherlands and England, the entire port of Plymouth is particularly prosperous and rich. The wool in the southwestern part of England is basically passed out through the port of Plymouth in the early morning, when other areas were still sleeping. The entire port had already woken up, and dock workers had already lined up, ready to accept a day's work, and the tax officers and policemen at the pier, rubbing their sleepy eyes, came over step by step, ready to start their day's work. Unlike the officials who arrived late, many merchant ships docked early in the morning at the pier. Waiting for the opening of the pier following the order of the tax officer, all the dock workers rushed in like a tide, and under the command of the leader, they were divided into small teams to carry out the transportation. The captains also yelled happily, urging the workers to go faster, and the workers always agree feebly and continue to work. At this time, the clever leader smiled and pulled the captains aside and made some reasonable requests. Due to the time requirement, the captains could only look bitter. From the purse that the tax officer had opened, he took out a few shillings again afterwards, as if they had been hinted by the leader. The workers immediately carried it at a high speed, and the speed was more than a little faster, and it was like wind on the soles of their feet. In this way, the merchants can only feel pain and happiness, watching their goods being carried down one by one. The whole morning passed in a blink of an eye, and the workers had been busy all morning. When the sun was in the middle of the sky, they stopped, drank a few sips of water, and ate some bread. Not much time, about half an hour. The reason for such a long time is also due to the government's regulations. The workers' bodies can't bear it even after working for a long time. Of course, the collective deliberation of the leaders of the exploiting workers, that is, the foreman, also agreed to this request. The more time the workers rest, the more cargo ships will be waiting at the dock. As a result, there will be more price increases, even more lucrative than before. Under a building on the pier, a dozen workers sat on the clean ground with their backs against the wall, eating the black bread in their hands without any scruples, talking and laughing. I said, "Leff, how many ships did you go to in the morning?" A worker with a dusty face, long black hair scattered on his head, and green eyes chewed bread in his mouth, and asked the flaxen worker beside him. The flaxen-colored worker chewed vigorously a few times, then took a sip of the cold water he brought from home, swallowed the bread in his mouth, and then said, "2 trips, but there is an extra charge for 1 trip, he." Speaking of this, the flaxen-haired worker smiled happily, showing several yellow and black teeth. "Hey, 3 pennies. That's pretty good." The black worker was a little surprised, and he patted Leff's shoulder happily. "I'll only make 2 trips, just 2 pennies. There's a captain who doesn't pay too much. What a cheapskate." As he said that, the flaxen-colored long-haired worker said bitterly, and then he was full of envy for Leff, who was beside him, "You know, the bread has risen to 2 pennies now, and Leff is 1 penny more than him, so he can buy that kind of soft bread with fewer stones and wood chips. It is so happy, Joseph. Don't worry, although there are fewer cargo ships with price increases in the afternoon, there are still many, and you will definitely come across them." Looking at the envious expression on his good friend's face, Leff comforted him. "Excuse me." Joseph didn't seem to appreciate it, and responded in a disappointed tone, and then ate his own bread silently. Seeing this, Leff had nothing to do. He was also the kind of person who is not good at words. He had tried his best to say what he said just now. Since it didn't work, he could only eat his own bread silently. The same is true for other people. They put the hard bread in water to make it soft, and then swallowed it little by little. During the whole process, everyone was speechless. In less than 10 minutes, everyone had finished eating the bread, and chatted again in full swing. At this time, a person came from not far away, who seemed to be similar to them, and they were all dock workers. He walked in front of everyone, met everyone's curious looks, smiled easily, and said, "Don't get me wrong, I'm just a missionary." "Missionaries? Haven't we already believed in the state religion? Why are there still missionaries?" A worker immediately asked. "That's right. Besides, missionaries usually go out to sea with boats, so how could they come to the pier?" "Yes, I often see missionaries running with merchant ships. I heard that they also want to spread the Lord's gospel and bring the Lord's gift to the New World. They are really great people." As soon as the word missionary was uttered, The discussion among the workers immediately became more and more heated. Seeing this scene, Elvis couldn't help feeling a little anxious. As a first-time preacher, he lacks some experience. Okay everyone, let me explain to everyone. I belong to the state religion, or it may not be the state religion. Please tell me what you heard. Elvis smiled, looked at the workers, and said loudly. At this moment, the workers calmed down. No matter which priest they were, they all had a higher status than them. That is, to be serious and obedient was the consensus in their minds. Everyone, God is just, omnipotent, omniscient, and everything that the Almighty Lord says and does is correct. After the words were finished, the workers nodded repeatedly, with pious expressions on their faces. Seeing this, Elvis continued, therefore, we should all read the Bible aloud and strictly follow the requirements in the Bible to live, so that we will be watched by our Lord, and on the day of judgment in the future, we will ascend to heaven and enjoy all the wonderful life. In the eyes of our Lord, all believers are equal. There is no difference between bishops and believers, only. And only, the Bible is the only authority for our believers. All books other than the Bible are superfluous and cumbersome. Faith is independent and free from any constraints. Neither the government nor anyone can affect our beliefs. Belief in the Lord does not require red tape, but also requires various rituals. As long as you have the Lord in your heart, everyone is a bishop and everyone is the Pope. I am talking to him with gusto. And when the workers were listening with gusto, there was a sudden shout from the side. Elvis, it's time to work. Here comes. Don't worry, everyone, I will continue to tell everyone tomorrow. After Elvis explained to everyone with a smile, he left quickly. Chapter 407. The Puritans in England. Regardless of what everyone was saying, Elvis quickly chose to leave, because, he did not lie, he was also a dock worker. However, unlike everyone else, he does not believe in the state religion, that is, Anglicanism. He believed in the Protestantism that came from the European continent, Calvinism. If it is more accurate, he believed in a sect, which became famous in the future, and all believers were called Puritans. The so-called Puritans refer to the religious reform movement that began in the first half of the 16th century and swept across the entire European land. Martin Luther in Germany and Calvin in France became the leaders of Protestantism after the Reformation due to the arbitrariness of the Anglican Church. The Reformation came late, but the Anglicans were still influenced by Calvinism, and it was still very large. In 1524, Tyndale, an Englishman, translated the New Testament into English. He can be said to be the first Puritan in England. The early Puritans hoped to live in full accordance with the principles of the Bible, and obedience to the teachings of the Bible could be said to be their top priority. Tyndale's aim was for every literate person in Britain to have a Bible. Historically, the Protestants in England, those who believed in Calvinism and were dissatisfied with the teachings of the Anglican Church, were called Puritans. Due to the religious persecution in the UK, most of the Puritans fled to the United States, so when people talk about Puritans, they generally refer to the Puritans in the United States. In history, the famous Mayflower ship, the pioneer of American immigrants, contained more than 100 people, all of whom were Puritans. What are Puritans? Puritans are not only a sect, but also an attitude, a tendency, and a value. It is a general term for the beliefs of believers. The Puritans are the most devout Protestants with the most holy life. They believe that everyone is a priest and everyone has a calling. It believes that each individual can communicate directly with God, and opposes the arbitrariness, corruption, red tape and formalism of the priest group. They advocate a simple, practical, and equal life of believers before God. If this is the case, Britain will not wantonly suppress the Puritans later. These Puritans have always been dissatisfied with the reform of the state religion, or they were dissatisfied with the incomplete reform. In the end, it even turned into supporting the National Republic and opposing the monarchy, requiring the church to dominate the country, not the country to dominate the church. Of course, under such extreme circumstances, some people must be dissatisfied, so the Puritans were divided into two, the moderate Presbyterians and the Independents. At the beginning, the Presbyterians supported the revolution together with the Independents. After Cromwell failed, he immediately flirted with the Royalists and moved towards a compromise route, and our Independents are firm and unyielding. They would rather go to America than support the Republic. Thus, America was born. Speaking of Puritans, we have to talk about its origin. Calvinism. The sect was extremely reactionary in the eyes of King Edward because it not only rejects the interference of the king and the government in religion, but also advocates republican equality, and even requires the church to govern the country and make the government subordinate to the church. More importantly, he actually did it. Calvin directly turned Switzerland into a country. Moreover, due to the emphasis on education and economic development, Switzerland is developing well. Moreover, This person is very similar to the old Maozi of later generations. He likes to export his thoughts thus, with precedence and successful implementation. French Huguenots, Dutch beggars, English Puritans, and Scottish Covenants were born successively. Elvis, how is your operation going this time? During the break between work, a fellow Calvinist who also belonged to the firm faith asked softly. It's okay. Everyone is very interested in what I'm promoting, and they listened intently. I think that after a while, someone will join us. A little bit of excitement appeared on Elvis' face, and he said excitedly, very good, keep working hard. I think our team will grow a lot in a short time. Well, I believe this day will come soon. Elvis said confidently afterwards. With excitement, Elvis felt that his strength had increased a lot, and his steps were much easier in this regard. He attributed everything to Almighty God, and his faith became more and more pious in his heart. He didn't notice that when he was speaking, someone behind him was watching him. In less than 10 minutes, 2 pigeons flew out of Plymouth. A day later, 2 letters of report were placed on Edward's desk, and the leader of Dark Blade, Guy Ham, and Jack from the Palace Intelligence Service stood on top of the king with their heads bowed. Okay, that's great. The family has formed a scale and is organized. You just came to tell me that Calvinism has taken root in England. Edward looked at the 2 leaders of the intelligence department who were silent and bowed their heads in front of them. He was so angry that he stared at them fiercely and said angrily, you said, I spend tens of thousands of pounds every year to raise you, and you actually give me such a grade. Can't I just feed the money to the dog? Having said that, Guy and Jack lowered their heads and knelt down on one knee, saying that they dare not. His Majesty forgives them, but they were thinking in their hearts, if we only relied on the little money you gave without extra income, we would have starved to death. Of course, they didn't dare to show it on their faces. They still had the appearance of pleading guilty. Seeing this, Edward still looked at the 2 angrily and said nothing. The air froze like this time slipped away, and more than half an hour passed. In a blink of an eye, Edward saw a little white hair appearing on the top of Guy's head, and saw that Jack had grown from a teenager to a strong young man. He sighed that time flies, and he sighed softly. Get up. As a punishment, you will be fined half a year's salary, and you will be resigned to stay in your post, so as to see the effect. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your forgiveness. The 2 quickly got up and thanked, with a look of gratitude. Guy, you Dark Blades are in charge of the area north of London, including Scotland and other places. Find out all the Calvinists. Don't act rashly. Yes, Your Majesty. Afterwards, Edward looked at the young and strong Jack again, and ordered, you, with everyone in the Palace Intelligence Department, carefully screen all the areas south of London, and don't act rashly. Yes, Your Majesty. Jack raised his head and agreed forcefully. As for London, the 2 of you act together. As your comparison, the winner will be rewarded. Edward pointed to London on the map on the wall, glanced at the 2, and said meaningfully, Chapter 408, Contest of Intelligence Systems. His Majesty's meaningful words made the eyes of both of them almost go out. At the first moment, there was only one thing they could think of, the title of night. Afterwards, the bodies of both of them trembled uncontrollably, and they suppressed the expressions of surprise on their faces, looking like they were working hard. Witnessing the change of temperament between the 2 from the inside out, Edward couldn't help but smile knowingly. Sure enough, there is competition in everything, and a field without competition is a stagnant pool of stagnant water, especially the courtiers below. They can't be allowed to do things in a friendly manner. If there is no one behind them who chases them, they can replace him at any time, otherwise they will not be serious in doing things. For example, Ferris Alexander, the former chairman of the Privy Council, has always had a William Celsey behind him. Otherwise, the central and local reforms cannot complete the basic reforms within 5 or 6 years. Therefore, this bureaucrat is like a cow. He will not move unless he is whipped. In particular, the Palace Intelligence Department is in charge of key domestic cases, and the Dark Blade is in charge of both foreign and domestic ordinary cases, with very few involvements. After being king for so many years, Edward summed up his experience just at the moment when the king complacently summed up his experience in administration. The 2 generals in front of him did not disappoint him either. Sparks sparked in their eye contact. I'll take my leave. The 2 left in unison, but when they left, the distance between them seemed to be greater than when they came. The guard closed the door gently, with a cold face, staring ahead indifferently, secretly watching the 2 regular guests in the palace, without saying a word. Dear Mr. Guy, I hope that in the coming time, please give me some advice. Jack said condescendingly to Guy Ham beside him with a smile on his face. The once thin boy has now become a burly man, with long brown hair hanging on his head, almost covering his eyes, and wearing a cloak and overcoat. giving people a gloomy feeling. Of course, it's my honor. Guy also smiled, and responded politely. I didn't know, but I thought the two were talking happily. After all, the people in your palace intelligence department are all from our dark blade. Of course we are more experienced. As soon as Guy finished speaking, the smile on Jack's face froze immediately, and then he said goodbye to Guy with a half smile. Farewell, dear Mr. Guy Ham, I hope you can bring a great news. Then, accompanied by a soft hum, Jack quickened his pace, walking further and further away from Guy. Young people are becoming more and more uncultivated, Alice. Guy Ham sighed softly, then sped up and walked out of the palace. Compared with the palace intelligence service, relying on the time gap, the dark blade has already spread its branches all over the country, and the entire United Kingdom and even European countries are full of its pace as a rising star. The Palace Intelligence Department is basically a shortened version of Dark Blade. There are only 1,000 main personnel in the Palace Intelligence Department, and the personnel are only distributed throughout England, while the Dark Blade has tens of thousands of personnel, covering the entire United Kingdom and European countries. Of course, in the relatively closed organization of the Palace Intelligence Department, the personnel are almost selected and recruited by themselves in the Dark Blade. Moreover, most of the members are core members with strong confidentiality. The Dark Blade is different. It is almost a translucent organization, and the personnel come from various backgrounds. Except for the core department, the rest are basically non-staff members. To put it simply, the Palace Intelligence Department is more like an action group, while the Dark Blade is more like a special intelligence collector. With a large number of people once back at headquarters, Guy called a general meeting including the 3 deputy leaders and the 12 commanders. They sat neatly on the chairs, waiting for the leader to speak. In fact, as Guy Ham has served as the Dark Blade for 7 or 8 years, his prestige in the entire Dark Blade has also skyrocketed as time goes by. In particular, as the king's trust grew, he did not say much in the Dark Blade. But it was not much worse. The other 3 deputy chiefs have also drawn up their own scope of work with him, and they cooperate tacitly. Generally speaking, Dark Blade has successfully moved towards a mature department, and power struggles are no longer mainstream. Everyone was called to a meeting today, mainly because His Majesty the King issued a task. Guy glanced at the high-level people sitting there, cleared his throat, and his thick voice followed after seeing that the faces of everyone in front of him became more serious, and they turned their gazes to him without moving. Guy then asked someone to pass the letter over for everyone sitting here to have a look. Everyone, His Majesty the King asks us to find out all heretics who believe in Calvinism. This is a test for me and for you. We must redouble our efforts this time. Having said this, the expression on Guy's face became more dignified. His Majesty the King handed over the area north of London to us, and the area south to the Palace Intelligence Service, but let us work with the Palace Intelligence Service to screen the Calvinists in London. If we lose in London, the specific consequences. Everyone wait. After saying this, Guy Ham directly chose to leave, leaving everyone with a confused face. You look at me, I look at you. I don't know why the leader cares so much about winning or losing. However, everyone knows that if they lose this time, His Majesty the King may not want them to do anything, but the leader will make them cry on the other side. Jack came to the headquarters of the Palace Intelligence Service with a cold face and name. It is the law enforcement department of the Star Chamber Court. So the Palace Intelligence Department set up its headquarters around the Star Chamber Court, and secondly, it is also for the convenience of sending prisoners there. Your Excellency. Your Excellency. Along the way, the staff coming and going kept greeting each other while they were busy, and Jack responded one by one with a cold face. Since the Palace Intelligence Department is equivalent to the Executive Department, there are relatively few personnel, and almost everyone is busy with work. The headquarters looks very large, but there are only a dozen clerks, which looks empty. Moreover, the Palace Intelligence Department is different from Dark Blade's Mingzhu centralization system, and instead speaks his words lane. Jack approached a busy clerk and said softly, "Yes, sir, please order." The clerk named Ryan immediately stopped his work and shouted loudly. The other clerks glanced at it, and then turned a blind eye and went about their own business. You write an order. Use the most urgent red paper. Yes, Your Excellency. Ryan was startled suddenly. He didn't understand what happened, so that Your Excellency the leader activated the highest emergency notification, which surprised him suddenly. Afterwards, Jack modified His Majesty's words, and along with the notification system of the entire Palace Intelligence Service, it spread to all parts of England. Chapter 409 The Intelligence Unit in Action. Plymouth Elvis didn't know that his first action had revealed too many secrets, and he was also being watched. Of course, After the clever man had such an effect in the first attempt, he still resisted the temptation and started his missionary career again and again. However, although the workers were the best source of mass for preaching, the deep-rooted state religion in Catholicism made his actions very slow to bear fruit. However, he was not in a hurry, because he knew that Calvinists had very few believers in England, and they had only recently established their own Presbyterian church, with a small number of people. Therefore, he asked for devout believers, and only accepted devout believers. So that the number of people is relatively small, and it is not easy to be found, especially in an inconvenient place like England, where the king has a strong control over religion and the country. Of course, after going there a few times, I found that on the surface, everyone was very enthusiastic. But there were very few people who came to contact and understand, and even fewer who intended to convert. Even so, Elvis still found 3 believers with a strong desire to convert. Such a big achievement naturally made him overjoyed, and also made him appreciated by the elders. In this regard, he decided to make persistent efforts to convert these 3 aspiring believers to Calvinism, so that the entire Presbyterian Church will grow stronger, overthrow the state religion as soon as possible, and bring the whole of England back to the right path. Therefore, he made an appointment with the 3 of them to pray Mass in an abandoned chapel at 9 o'clock this morning. Although Calvinism does not pay attention to whether to pray in the church, and advocates everyone is a priest, everyone has a calling, they believe that each individual can directly communicate with God without the help of a pastor or priest. But preaching in church helps, and they are more receptive standing in front of the altar of the church. Elvis held the English version of the Bible and read it seriously, but in his heart, he has been thinking about how to convert all 3 of them, so that he is very likely to be elected and become a high-level manager. Although he believes in Calvinism, the desire in people's hearts still makes people unable to let go. At this moment, footsteps sounded next to his ears. He looked up and saw 4 timid men walking in at the door of the abandoned church. When he looked carefully, 3 of them were still the ones he had made an appointment with, while the other was, "I don't know him, but he looks familiar." I said, "Lev, look, I've said it all. I don't want to come. You insist on pulling me here. I really have no need to convert." The active Joseph looked at Elvis, who was wearing a white cassock, in front of him. He felt that his legs were a little uncontrollable, and his heart beat so fast that it seemed to jump out of his chest. "Don't worry, Joseph. Pastor Elvis won't blame you for coming here without permission." Lev, who had always been taciturn, said so rarely, holding Joseph's arm with both hands, persuading him, "But I really have no desire to convert." Joseph glanced at the 2 people with strange eyes beside him, and whispered into Lev's ear, his face full of pleading, "Dude, you don't need to change your faith, just come with me." Lev whispered helplessly, "Okay." In desperation, Joseph could only agree. The 4 of them saw Elvis, who had been waiting for a long time, and quickly came to the altar. "Who is this?" Elvis pointed to Joseph and asked curiously, "My Lord Pastor, this is my friend Joseph. He also wanted to convert, so he begged me to bring him here." Seeing the surprised expression on Elvis' face, Lev quickly explained, "Yes, my Lord Pastor, I do have this intention," Joseph said with a mouth that didn't match his heart, and there was still a look of emotion on his face. Seeing this, Elvis naturally wouldn't drive him away, but comforted him, and then talked about his teachings to brainwash them. "People are equal at the moment they are created by God, so we should go back to the beginning. We don't need the teaching of pastors and priests. We can communicate with God, pray. People are equal." Elvis talked eloquently on it, knowing these teachings well, and coming casually after. The 4 people below listened mesmerized, with pious looks on their faces. He became more interested in speaking, and the small church was filled with his voice. Among the 4 people who listened, only Joseph, who was pious on the surface, was always concerned and anxious. Unlike the honest Lev, he has always been active in his mind, expecting to be rich, to drink and eat meat, and to live the life of an upper class. And what Elvis preached in front of them was thrift, no alcohol, no indulgence, consumption and pleasure. This is simply living amongst life. Only an honest person like Lev would believe it, but he wouldn't. Just last night, when he was about to close the door and go to sleep, a few athletic men came to his house. Their bodies were tightly wrapped, and they couldn't see a trace of their faces. They held a sword in one hand and a few golden coins in the other, which made Joseph's heart beat, and his legs unconsciously knelt down. Joseph swore that this was the most gold coin he had ever seen before his eyes, and it was also the one he was most afraid of. He knelt on the ground and begged for mercy, begging these unkind people to spare their family. However, the masked 3 drove his wife and children back to the room, and kept dangling 5 gold coins in front of him at the same time. He also felt the cold back of the iron sword on his neck, and the sharpness that could cut through his throat in an instant. After that, He thought he had hallucinations in his ears, and this group of people asked him to go to church with his friend left tomorrow, listen to the preaching of the unreliable pastor, and mix in the so-called Protestantism. Joseph's first feeling was danger. It was a pool of deep water, deep enough to drown him, but the man forced him to go with a sword, and gave him 5 gold pieces in return. Finally, he was warned not to reveal anything about the evening, otherwise, the lives of himself and his family would not be guaranteed in this way. He was threatened and had no choice but to leave timidly. But the next day, when he was about to think of a reason to go together, Leff pulled him and went together. After explaining all the way, he realized that the fierce wife of Leff's family did not allow him to ask for leave and not work. For this reason, he pulled himself together, ready to go to work together and come back, and the salary was fooled with his private money in this way. Joseph pretended to be unwilling, fearing to rouse Leff's suspicion. Not only Joseph, but throughout England and the United Kingdom, dark blade and court intelligence kept throwing money away, preparing to take out the lurking Calvinists in one fell swoop. Chapter 410. I have made meritorious service to the kingdom. I want to see His Majesty. The dark blade and the palace intelligence service were not established. In less than a month, after a lot of money, temptation, and undercover agents, most of the details of the Calvinist faction in the United Kingdom were fully investigated. Now, a lot of materials are placed in the Secretariat of His Majesty the King, which looks extremely exaggerated. Several young secretaries quickly started counting, summed up the information, and then forwarded it to His Majesty the King for a preview. The status of the king brought Edward a variety of government affairs. It was impossible for him to be like those kings in Europe, all of which were managed by the Prime Minister and court ministers, as the treasurer, nor can they do it by themselves like the emperors of ancient China. In the whole of the United Kingdom, the bills and decrees handed over to him by the cabinet every day are piled up. This still excludes trivial matters, all of which require his autograph, royal approval, and rejection, and then these are handed over from the cabinet. The decree will take effect and be passed on, and Edward didn't have a ceremonial supervisor around him to approve him, which made him a little unbearable. Therefore, he personally set up a secretariat under the Palace Affairs Office to handle some government affairs for him, and they basically dealt with those tedious matters. As for the original secretaries, they became life secretaries, no longer responsible for government affairs, professional matters, and left them to professional people. Although the Secretariat is not a high-ranking official, it has always been a holy place for cultivating people. Therefore, it is either full of noble children, or the outstanding ones from the official selection examination. It can be said that they are all the future pillars of the kingdom. Down below, a head of a 1,000-household district can't run away. In a few years, the county head will be sure. If the ability is good, he may enter the cabinet at the age of 40. All of this is in the imagination of His Majesty the King. These secretaries have only been here for more than a year. Is it too early, Your Majesty? The information from the Dark Blade and the Palace Intelligence Service has been sorted out. This is a brief list. A young man with a strong aristocratic taste walked up to Edward respectfully and handed over a piece of paper densely packed with letters to Edward N. Edward agreed, and then began to read. The secretary at the side also quietly left without making a sound from the list. Edward got a message that too much freedom of thought is not good among the Protestants passed down from Europe. Lutheranism had the least influence, with only a few hundred people. The most radical Calvinists, however, have more than 2,000 members, including local priests, scholars, officials, and the gradually affluent middle class who are not satisfied with the Reformation. This is still the core number, and those non-staff personnel are really countless, even almost catching up with a group of Catholics. Seeing this, the king, who has always maintained his dominance, couldn't bear a crack. Edward slapped the table vigorously with his right hand, and frowned. These people really have enough. When they are hungry, they will riot. When they are finally full, they are ready to rebel and seize power when they have nothing to do. All of a sudden, Edward felt like he was going to explode. Can't you live your life well? Don't bother. He knew that if it was a history book, these people were representatives of justice, constantly fighting for the rights of the people. However, how could he follow them along with the situation? This United Kingdom of his own is his painstaking effort, and it will be passed on to future generations. Stability is the most important thing. Come here. Yes, Your Majesty. A secretary quickly ran over and responded, send down the order and continue the investigation. After that, they will be arrested one by one according to the list and sent to London. Edward had a cold face, squinted his eyes, looked in the direction of Spain, and ordered through gritted teeth. A while ago, he joked about the religious issue in Spain, but today, the same issue has appeared in the United Kingdom. This slap in the face is too fast. As soon as he thought that hundreds of people would be arrested and their fate would be changed, Edward immediately felt a sense of guilt afterwards. The pleasure of deciding the life and death of others overwhelmed the sense of guilt. Power is indeed a good thing. Early in the morning, the mayor of Plymouth got up and had a simple breakfast with his wife and children that didn't match his status regarding this. His wife from a businessman's family and his son who was used to delicious food naturally chewed with resentment, and the expressions on their faces were extremely ugly. Seeing this scene, His Excellency the Mayor snorted coldly, and the two of them grimaced and started eating. After eating up his portion, His Excellency the Mayor asked the maid to clean up for him. He wanted to go to the city hall to work with the best appearance. Looking back at his unwilling wife and children, he sighed. He knew that if he wasn't around, these two people would definitely steal food later, so what could he do? Diligence and thrift are the guarantee for the family to continue, and extravagant things will make people degenerate. The mayor only wanted to understand this truth a while ago. Thanks to those pastors who conveyed the true will of the Lord to him, he was on the right track. However, my wife and children still believe in false religion and go to pray every weekend, don't you know? Everyone is a pastor and can communicate with God through the Bible. How can a pastor be used? Sitting in the carriage, His Excellency the Mayor rubbed his forehead, feeling very troubled about how to induce his family to convert soon. His Excellency the Mayor was dressed in formal attire and arrived at the City Hall before 8 o'clock. Regarding the time requirement, the Mayor has really complained about the central government for countless times, and it is too lenient. When to go to work, and when to leave work, the requirements are so clear. Now, he misses the time when the king was alive. What corruption, bribery, it's all commonplace. Unlike now, everything is so strictly controlled. However, if he really wanted to go back to the past, he really didn't want to. At that time, he would not have as much power as he does now, and he could be promoted and raise his salary. Thinking this way, he also responded to the staff who greeted him along the way, and the image of a friendly mayor was immediately vividly reflected. After going up the stairs and turning a corner, he arrived at his office. The secretary at the side looked a little strange. After opening the door for him, he was about to inquire when he saw the scene in front of him, and said all the words that came out were swallowed. I saw a few people sitting on his desk, wearing blood-red cloaks, and what was even more strange was that their faces were covered. Only two big eyes could be seen. I don't think I've ever been corrupt, the mayor stammered as he looked at these people. Of course, you didn't. The leader replied crisply. Take him away. The leader motioned. You have no evidence, so how can you arrest me casually? I am the mayor of Plymouth, and I have personally met His Majesty. His Majesty the King will not let you go. It's really troublesome. Ignore him, just arrest him. Looking at the mayor, who was still stubborn and resisting arrest, the crisp voice sounded again. No, I have made contributions to the kingdom. I want to see your Majesty. I want to see your Majesty. Suddenly, the hall of the City Hall sounded like a hog-killing wail. Chapter 411. The young Duke of Norfolk. Following the order of His Majesty the King, the two major intelligence agencies instantly stood up, dressed in brightly colored clothes, rode horses and carried swords, and walked around the streets. For a while it was the street, and for a while it was the government hall. People blocked and killed people, unrestrained, with fresh clothes and angry horses. Both the officials and the police feared these people like a tiger and dared not stop them in the slightest. Suddenly, the two silent organizations received a lot of admirers. This kind of prestige, even the nobles may not be able to achieve it, but they did it. Of course, the effect of such a quick and brutal action is also gratifying. As of 1 month, Edward already knew that more than 1,900 people had been arrested and were being escorted to London, and the number of people being arrested is also increasing, exceeding 2,000, 3,000, just around the corner. And the Dark Blade and the Palace Intelligence Department seemed to be competing for success, and all kinds of good news came one after another. It wasn't that I took hundreds of people here, but I found hundreds of people there, making the entire British kingdom seem to be Calvin. Average pie. In this way, in Edward's eyes, this made him a little dumbfounded. He really didn't know whether he was happy because he found so many Calvinists, or because he was discouraged because of his inability to govern the country. In short, Our Majesty the King is very annoying, super annoying. Even those beauties who sleep with him and do shameful things can only slightly relieve his worries, but cannot completely relieve his worries. Edward thought about this, and finally took Queen Mary, Princess Elizabeth, and several little Marys together, fled London, and came to his own Windsor Castle to find his own good mood. Of course, all of the above are just reasons for Edward to fool those nobles and ministers. In fact, it was because of the unscrupulous behavior of the two major intelligence agencies, who despised the authority of the government and trampled on the dignity of the nobles, that the entire local government, the central government, and the nobles became angry. You must know that the two major intelligence organizations not only captured many middle-class people, but also captured some aristocrats and officials who wanted to convert after eating too much and having nothing to do. Dissatisfied, Edward counted a little, and there were only a few barons, knights, and a dozen county-level officials. Compared with ancient China, this was much less. Edward even felt that this was basically nothing, but the nobles and the government don't think so. In their opinion, His Majesty's behavior was so impulsive that they didn't even give them any notice. Moreover, they arrested people without giving any reason, which made the hearts of the whole kingdom a little unstable. More importantly, the two major intelligence departments, in broad daylight, in front of a group of common people, took away the dignified nobles who flowed with noble blood, and the high-ranking shepherds who shepherd the sheep, as if they were killing pigs. Nobles and officials, are they losing face? How to show off in front of the common people in the future? Therefore, the voices of the impeachment of the two major departments are endless, as well as the officials and nobles who come to intercede. The aristocrats have broken their bones and connected their tendons, and they have been married for hundreds of years. The relationship has been ruined and both are prosperous. It is understandable for Edward to come to intercede. However, what happened to those officials? They couldn't get close to each other. Even if it was a gift, it was impossible to do this. That is, only the officials and officials protected each other and formed cliques. To explain it, this gave Edward a thorough insight into forming cliques, and he has completely integrated into the genes of the bureaucratic class, whether it is Chinese or foreign. His Majesty the King has always wanted to spend some time with his women and children, but these nobles and bureaucrats kept asking the king to see him, which annoyed Edward very much. But you have to meet them. After all, they are considered the ruling class, and they cannot be separated from the royal family. So, Edward sat quietly by the river fishing alone, while a black stupid bear squatted aside like a dog, with its big red tongue stretched out, its mouth wide open, and it blew all over the floor. The two big eyes stared at the river intently, as if knowing that it could not make a sound. It just watched quietly and drooled quietly. Edward didn't bother to care about it, and caught the fish on his own. On the other side, the Duke of Norfolk, who was finally received by the king, hurriedly followed the guards to the river. By the way, the old Duke of Norfolk, who couldn't get older and loved painting, died in 1554, and now his son, Thomas Howard, is the same as his father's name. However, what is special about him is that he was born in 1538, about the same age as Edward. Even so, the young Duke also served as the Earl of Arundel. In addition, he is also the Dean of the hereditary British Academy of Arms. The Duke of Norfolk's fiefdom is Arundel Castle in Sussex. Although the name refers to Norfolk, the title of Duke of Norfolk has been hereditary since it came to the Howard family in 1483 and has continued into the 21st century. Therefore, although he is young, he can still represent the nobles of England and come to meet Edward. When he came to the river, he saw His Majesty the King was fishing. At a glance, his face was very calm, but when there was a bear next to the king, his expression was really horrified. Although he had long heard that His Majesty the King raised a bear, seeing it with his own eyes still made him shudder. He turned around reflexively, and wanted to run away, but when he looked back, he was not even afraid of His Majesty the King, so why should I be afraid? So, when Edward turned his head, he saw such a picture. The young Duke of Norfolk tightly held the arm of the guard beside him, and his expression on his face was as calm as possible. But his trembling legs and his movement of just moving a small step clearly reflected his fear and nervousness. The young king smiled when he saw such a funny scene, and the Duke of Norfolk, who was walking slowly, also forcibly maintained the dignity of a nobleman, saluted him, and then slowly began to move over. Your Excellency, you don't have to. This stupid bear won't hurt anyone, Edward explained, and then touched the big ear of the stupid bear in a demonstrative manner. But the stupid bear didn't care at all. Seeing this, the young Duke forced a smile on his face, and walked over at a faster speed as if smelling a stranger. Stupid bear suddenly turned his head and grinned at the young Duke. His Excellency the Duke trembled all over, stopped, and looked at His Majesty the King as if asking for help. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412. Dawn in number 039, T. Underestimate. Seeing this, Edward patted the stupid bear's head and raised the fishing rod. Then the stupid bear turned his head and looked at the river again with his chubby head. Your Excellency, I don't know if you came to see me. What's the matter? Edward asked softly, fishing without looking at him, looking at the clear and calm river like a stupid bear. Your Majesty, I came here this time not on my own will, but on behalf of the nobles. I am begging your Majesty for mercy. The young Duke looked at the huge body of the stupid bear, then at the immobile body of His Majesty the King, and his calm expression. He took a big step, stood 5 feet away from Edward, and reported, "Oh? Is that so? What's wrong with those nobles? If there's anything you need to ask your majestic Duke to intercede in person, tell me." His Majesty's yin and yang voice came from his ears, and the young Duke was startled. He rubbed his right foot on the lawn unconsciously. He heard from the words that His Majesty was very dissatisfied with his arrival. However, as the only Duke in England and the representative of the entire English aristocracy, he does not have the prestige of his own father, and he cannot convince the aristocrats simply by relying on his title. Therefore, the nobles urged him to come and meet His Majesty in unison. In order to maintain the dignity of the nobles, and also to maintain his position as the leader of the English nobles in his own family, he had no choice but to come to meet the king with a cheek. As mentioned earlier in the War of the Roses, the English nobles suffered countless casualties, extinct, and rebellious, which almost brought a big sweep to the English nobles. Coupled with the lessons learned from the previous dynasty, the two monarchs, Henry VIII and Henry VIII, have been suppressing the aristocratic group, forcing this class of aristocrats who were originally enemies of the king and separated powers to beg for mercy and attach themselves to the king. Therefore, when Edward came to the throne, there was only one duke, the real duke, and the court duke was not counted. Therefore, the Duke of Norfolk, as the only duke, is naturally the natural leader of the nobles. Why beg for mercy? Edward deliberately pretended to be confused and asked for a moment. The young duke was not used to His Majesty's shamelessness, and was surprised in this regard. He could only bend down respectfully and look at the big fat bear with saliva splashing from the corner of his eye from time to time, and carefully apologized with a smile. "Your Majesty, a while ago, Dark Blade and the Palace Intelligence Service suddenly arrested several barons in broad daylight. Do you know?" "I know. What's the matter?" Edward then turned his head, as if it was a matter of course. As soon as he finished speaking, the young duke's expression froze, as if he was constipated. "Very embarrassed, Your Majesty. You know that the nobles are the cornerstone of the kingdom. It's out of date to arrest several barons without pronouncing charges." The Duke of Norfolk looked at His Majesty's flat face and felt a faint majesty, swallowed his saliva, and could not speak more euphemistically. "Oh, I know what you mean." Edward looked suddenly enlightened, and when His Excellency the Duke showed a happy expression, he turned around and continued to fish. This time, the Duke's expression became even uglier. "Do you want to say that arresting the nobles at will damage the dignity of the nobles and make them more likely to be dissatisfied?" "Right, yes, Your Majesty, I have exactly that intention." Your Excellency the Duke quickly agreed. "Then you don't have to worry about it. In a few days, their charges will definitely come out. I didn't target the nobles, but just them." His Majesty the King hurriedly threw the fishing rod upwards, and then pulled it up. The stupid bear knew that something was coming, so he quickly opened his mouth to bite the fishing rod, and pulled it back together. And His Excellency the Duke at the side also immediately came over to help, and soon, a big fish about 1 foot was jumping around on the grass. After working for such a long time, Edward felt a little excited, and he couldn't help saying to His Excellency the Duke at the side, and the chubby and fat stupid bear squinted his eyes when he saw it, and spewed out his saliva like the water in the river. Before Edward could react, he rushed straight at lightning speed. A bear rolled, a big fish. It was near his mouth, with 4 cylindrical thighs. He stepped forward quickly, and after a while, he was about 10 meters away from Edward. "Damn it, this stupid bear." Edward reacted. Seeing this appearance, he couldn't help but blurted out a curse. Seeing the surprised look on the face of the Duke at the side, he quickly restrained himself, showing a calm look on his face. "Again, Your Majesty, since this is the case, I have nothing to say." His Excellency the Duke could only sigh in frustration, and said softly, "But, Your Majesty, you must know that the Scottish nobles are unreliable, and only we English nobles are the most powerful pillars of the royal family." After saying these words, the young Duke bid farewell to His Majesty the King, ending the journey of meeting. But Her Majesty the King is thinking about his last words. The so-called English nobility and Scottish nobility are just 2 groups of nobility in the British kingdom. Although Scottish and English nobles sometimes marry, in the final analysis, one is a Cade and the other is an Anglo-Saxon, and the culture and language are different. With the establishment of the United Kingdom, and driven by His Majesty the King intentionally or unintentionally, Many Scottish nobles began to settle in London and came to the bustling city of London. As the saying goes, shallow water is more than good in the past. London and the court naturally seemed affluent for the English nobles alone, but the migration of the Scottish nobles made the city of London extraordinarily noisy. Moreover, with the establishment of the United Kingdom, the power of the central government was also sought after by many nobles. However, the positions of the central government are limited, and the two factions naturally compete. The two factions of nobles naturally became dirty. After all, there is no central government official to be a member of parliament who has nothing to do. The English aristocracy occupies a favorable location. After all, His Majesty the King is surrounded by English aristocrats all day long, which is a great advantage. Moreover, the Scottish nobles have just migrated here, and they are not familiar with the place of life. However, the Scottish aristocrats occupy the majority of the people. There are at least a few hundred aristocrats, while the English aristocrats are only a few dozen. The gap is too big, but generally speaking, the power of the two factions of nobles is still balanced, and His Majesty the King is also willing to fight between the two factions, so as to benefit from it. The Duke's words hit Edward's point directly. Chapter 413 Unbelievable. Although the Scottish nobles are also loyal to the royal family, they are far inferior to the English nobles. More importantly, the Scottish nobles can only help Edward stabilize Scotland, while the English nobles can help him stabilize England. Logically speaking, the functions of the two factions of nobles are the same, and they should be equal, but in fact, it is different. The importance of the English nobility is much higher than that of the Scottish nobility. That's because England is the foundation of Edward. With England, there are Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. In terms of population, England has more than 3 million people, while Scotland has only 1 million people, and many of them are controlled by nobles. In terms of taxation, England pays hundreds of thousands of taxes and is the largest taxpayer in the United Kingdom, not to mention that it provides a lot of wealth to the royal family. More importantly, Edward is the King of England first, but the crown of Scotland is shared with Mary, and the importance is immediately clear. England is his foundation, and only with England can he have everything. Therefore, the words of the Duke of Norfolk immediately made His Majesty the King feel uneasy. How to choose between the English nobles and the Scottish nobles? Of course, there is no need to question it. We should indeed be cautious in weakening the English nobles. After thinking about it for a while, Edward came to a conclusion. What I just said was about the arrest of the nobles. What does it have to do with the English nobles? Damn, sure enough, everyone is simple. Don't look at him, young, but be careful and think a lot. In the blink of an eye, the capture of the nobles was immediately involved in the struggle between the English nobles and the Scottish nobles, forcing the king to make a choice: catch them, and the power of the English aristocracy will be weakened, the power of the Scottish aristocracy will rise sharply, and the balance will be broken. His own rule is also not stable. Don't catch it. But they are all Calvinists, and if they are released, the harm will be even greater in the future. In this way, it made it difficult for Edward to make a choice. For a while a smile appeared on the corner of the Duke of Norfolk's mouth. Sitting in the carriage and returning to the mansion in the end, when he saw the astonishment in His Majesty's eyes, he knew that his purpose was almost inseparable. His Majesty the King is the center of power. Even though the cabinet is still in London, most of the nobles have come to the vicinity of Windsor Castle, selling land to buy land, and building houses. For a while, the arrival of the Scottish nobles made the entire Windsor Castle. The land is hot, and the price is skyrocketing. Sitting in the carriage, the sound of jingling came from the ears. His Excellency the Duke opened the curtains of the bed and looked at the scenes of the ground breaking and the dust rising, which immediately dissipated His Excellency the Duke's happy mood. A bunch of Scottish savages who think they are civilized by moving to London. They're so shameless, no need to guess. His Excellency the Duke knows that this is the group of Scottish nobles who are building houses. After all, there are very few unowned villas near Windsor Castle, and if they want to follow His Majesty the King, they can only buy land and build houses. For this, the young Duke naturally looked down on him. His eyes were full of contempt. As everyone knows, outside the car, a group of Scottish nobles are gathering together, riding horses and carrying bows, huddled in front of and behind them. Very majestic. A group of people are discussing their prey. Happily, although they stayed in the bustling city of London, they were dazzled by all kinds of things, curious and enjoying, but, in the final analysis, they came from Scotland after all. Although the city is good, it is not as refreshing as hunting on horseback. So, taking the King's Majesty to Windsor Castle, they also got together and started hunting for commoners. Hunting is not allowed without the permission of the Lord, but they are nobles, so there is a natural exception. What's more, there are hundreds of people in the group, and any nobleman who dares to come to obstruct them is afraid that they will be beaten. Your Excellency, today is really a good harvest. The green-eyed, red-haired Earl Lennox had 2 deer and a wild boar piled up beside him. What's the matter? Today's harvest is less than half of my usual. England is not as good as Scotland. If I just casually, there will be more than one wolf. Even though he was almost 30 years old, Earl Lennox was still reckless and rude. He stroked his beard, raised his chin, and said arrogantly, only wolves can reflect the courage of our men. Those English girls naturally can't understand. Following the Earl's words, many Scottish nobles immediately burst into laughter. Just as England called the Scots barbarians, the Scottish nobles were naturally not to be outdone, and quickly nicknamed the gentlemanly English nobles, laughing at their awkwardness, hesitation, and lack of decisiveness of men. Hey, Your Excellency, isn't that the family crest of the Duke of Norfolk? It's the Duke of Norfolk's carriage as usual. Aside, the sharp-eyed nobleman saw the Duke of Norfolk's carriage and said hastily, although he looks down on the English nobles, as the only duke in England, the leader of the nobles, and the family crest of the Duke of Norfolk, many nobles naturally know it. After all, knowing the family emblems of nobles is the knowledge they must have. It's really the crest of the Duke of Norfolk's family. I'm afraid the Duke of Norfolk is sitting inside. Earl Lennox immediately looked up, thought for a while, and said this carriage came out of Windsor Castle as usual. It seems that the Duke went to see His Majesty the King, but he didn't know if he met him. Another nobleman immediately said, his tone was full of sarcasm, what's going on? Why did the Duke of Norfolk ask to see the King? What happened? Earl Lennox was a little confused for a while. He didn't care much about political matters. When he got the news, he immediately asked, seeing that His Excellency the Earl was interested. The little noble immediately puffed up his chest and said, I heard that 2 spies under His Majesty the King were mobilized a while ago and arrested several English nobles. The Duke of Norfolk, as the leader of the nobles, naturally cannot just sit idly by. He can only ask His Majesty the King to see him, but His Majesty the King has refused to accept his request for an audience several times. The Earl naturally expressed his interest in the little nobleman. What? His Majesty the King was able to arrest nobles, but his spies arrested them. How could it be possible? Earl Lennox couldn't believe it when he heard the news. It was hard for him to imagine that in Scotland, even if the nobles committed treason, but only if the Parliament found it, that is, the nobles found it innocent, His Majesty the King would not fart. But in England, the King's lackeys dared to arrest the nobles at will, and ask the Duke to intercede. Such a picture is really unimaginable. When did the King have so much power? Chapter 414, The Curtain Ends. No matter in the tavern or in the hotel, there was a lot of discussion about the wanton arrests of His Majesty's 2 intelligence agencies. Fear, anger, and dread, to name a few. People can't stop their fear of being arrested at random without leaving a single word of information. Even the number of merchants has decreased a lot, which Edward did not expect. In the tavern, there was no more hustle and bustle in the past, and there were only a few people. Seeing the 2 or 3 people whispering in the tavern, this made the owner of the tavern frown, and those beautiful girls who were going to do business in bed also leaned against the wall boredly, frowning. There were too few people, and their business was not easy to do. Boss, have 2 glasses of dark beer. Okay, you 2 wait a moment. There was a sudden sound in the ear, which made the boss's heart feel relieved, and he quickly agreed, loudly. Looking up, 2 middle-aged men, one fat and one thin, came over, sat directly on the empty table, and gave orders loudly. Seeing this, the boss poured 2 glasses of wine from the barrel without any delay, holding back the pain in his heart, and specially added some more to attract customers. Guest, please use it slowly. Afterwards, he directly took 4 pennies from the table, said something kindly, and then backed away. Oh, is there a lot more wine today than before? Seeing that the wine glass was full, much more than in the past, the fat man sighed softly. Of course, there are fewer customers now, and now there are fewer customers. We just need to attract customers. When there are more customers, we will return to the original state. Cherish the present time. The thin man took a sip of the rye wine mixed with water and said with emotion, tell me, why does His Majesty the King want to arrest people everywhere? This is even more tense than when His Majesty Henry VIII was here. The fat man leaned over and asked quietly, looking around, as if he was afraid that others would overhear. Hey, who knows, it won't involve us anyway, don't worry. The thin man smiled wretchedly and said softly, how? Asked the fat man, didn't you see that fewer and fewer people were arrested in London? I didn't hear a single person was arrested yesterday. That is to say, this operation is almost over. It's almost over. If you want to arrest us, you have already arrested us. You won't wait until this time." Having said that, the thin man breathed a sigh of relief, took another sip of wine, and said loudly on the other side. The other guests in the tavern, the bosses, gradually retracted their pricked ears, and gradually put a smile on their faces. Suddenly, the whole tavern became noisy. Not only the skinny man, but other smart people in London have also discovered this situation. The previously depressed streets suddenly became lively, as if nothing had happened, and people lived their lives as usual. London, Palace of Whitehall. The leader of the Dark Blade, Guy Ham, combed his hair shiny, and he was wearing a high-grade linen suit that fit him well. With his straight waist, he had the aura of a mature uncle, which was irresistible and full of charm. Meanwhile, Jack from the Palace Intelligence Department was also wearing a high-grade black sackcloth, with sharp eyes and a dashing demeanor. Seeing the appearance of the two generals under him, Edward nodded, took a sip of hot tea, and asked slowly, "Tell me, what you have gained for such a long time." A month had passed since the capture activity, but the situation was somewhat unexpected to Edward. But the business was affected and sluggish for a while, and on his desk, the impeachment of the two intelligence organizations had piled up. Moreover, the follow-up effects are also constantly being produced, which makes Edward regret his reckless decision. In order not to intensify religious conflicts, he didn't bring it up on the surface, which caused the entire United Kingdom to have a split. Jean, who knew that it would have such a huge impact, that it would affect different levels of politics, economy, religion, and justice. "But I have already done it, and it is useless to regret it. I can only forcefully support it, Your Majesty." After a month of investigation and arrest, Dark Blade has destroyed 132 false religious organizations, arrested more than 1,300 members, and dozens of gentlemen and nobles. Guy Ham has the most seniority and the oldest age, so he was naturally the first to report. When he reported, he had a serious face. In London, more than 400 people were arrested, ranking first among all places. After speaking, he took a step back and returned to the original place. Jack took a step forward at this time, and said softly, "Your Majesty, in the past month, the Palace Intelligence Service has destroyed 142 false religious organizations and arrested more than 1,300 people. Among them, London is the leader with 300 people. It's unreasonable. London, the capital of the United Kingdom, has become a den of thieves. It makes people laugh." Edward put down his teacup, slapped the table and said loudly, "Next, stop the arrests and let's go to our duties." After walking back and forth for a few steps, Edward gave orders. "Yes, Your Majesty." Guy Ham and Jack glanced at each other and replied in unison. Just when the two were about to retreat, Edward finally realized, "That's right, Guy Ham, get ready, you will be a knight in a few days." "Yes, Your Majesty." Hearing this, Guy Ham couldn't help but agree with joy on his face, as if he was afraid that the king would go back on his word. On the other hand, Jack's face was full of envy. Who wouldn't want to become a nobleman? But seeing this, he couldn't help cheering up. Guy had served 2 generations of monarchs before he was awarded the title of knight, which he deserved sooner or later. "I will do the same and become a master," Jack secretly swears in his heart. Next, the busiest one is the Star Chamber Court. The Dark Blade and the Palace Intelligence Service are only responsible for arresting people, and the trial is left to them. It's a pity that they only have more than 100 people, and they worked overtime overnight. It took about a month to review the 2,000 people. After reporting, there were no mistakes or omissions. Almost all of them were Calvinists, and the few who made mistakes were hooligans and were arrested. In this way, the biggest trial case since Edward came to the throne is over. In order to consolidate his rule, Edward did not punish them like France and Spain, but exiled them to Ireland. This is his deliberate decision. More than 2,000 people did not commit a crime, and they were killed directly. He couldn't accept it. It was too inhumane. Or exile to Ireland. Here he directly regards it as a place of exile, and there is a shortage of people anyway, so it is such a happy decision. Therefore, more than 2,000 people at one time were transferred to the island of Ireland, and the Supreme United Court of the United Kingdom announced that Calvinism was added to the blacklist, and all people in the United Kingdom were not allowed to believe in it. Moreover, it also emphasized that any citizen must believe in the state religion. This is the real Christian orthodoxy, and those who violate it will be severely punished immediately afterwards. The Anglican sect declared Calvinism to be a heresy and advised everyone not to believe in it. In this way, the nobles and commoners also knew the situation, and the kingdom returned to calm. So, with the passing of 1556, this sudden inquisition in the United Kingdom also came to an end. Chapter 415, The Harvest of 1558. Time flies by, and in the blink of an eye, the time has come to 1559. In the past few years, although France and Spain have been busy dealing with the Calvinists in their own countries, the foreign wars have not fallen behind. Italy became a victim of Spain and France's struggle for hegemony in southern Europe. The first period, 1494 to 1504. At the heart of this period was the French struggle for the Kingdom of Naples. As a result, France won successively, occupying Milan and Lombardy one after another. In 1500, France and Spain colluded to occupy Naples, but in the spring of 1503, war broke out between France and Spain due to the uneven distribution of spoils. On December 29, 1503, in the Battle of the Garigliano River, the Western Army won, and the French army was forced to abandon the Kingdom of Naples and make it a Spanish territory. The second period was from 1509 to 1515. In December 1508, because the Republic of Venice took the opportunity to expel France to expand its territory, all anti-Venice forces united to establish the Cambrai League. Members included Spain, France, the Pope, Holy Roman Empire, jointly fighting against Venice. As a result, France occupied Milan and Spain occupied Naples. The third period, 1521 to 1559. Spain and France signed the Cateau-Cambrésis peace treaty, officially ending the war for Italy, and Spain replaced France and took control of Italy. Of course, unlike in history, Edward did not send troops to participate in this battle this time, so this treaty did not sacrifice the interests of Britain as in history. That's right, in history, when Queen Mary was alive, she fought for Spain and lost Calais, the only British stronghold in France. The title of King of France has really become a false name. Therefore, the signing of this treaty has little to do with Edward. If there is a relationship, it is one. The Bronze Cannon entered the stage of history with the Italian War interspersed with a piece of news. Habsburg Emperor Charles V died in 1558. In this way, the Spanish Habsburg family and the Austrian Habsburg family officially declared a split at the same time. Good news came from Spain. Edward's sister, Queen Mary, gave birth to a prince named Charles for King Philip I of Spain at the age of 40 after an accidental miscarriage in the United Kingdom. Edward's wife, the Queen of Scots, gave birth to a prince for Edward, who is also the heir to the Kingdom of Britain for his name. Edward thought for a long time, and finally, with a big stroke of a pen, Charlie. That's right, the first heir to a kingdom was Charles Tudor. As for why he took the name, Edward did it purely for fun in his generation. If he fights against Spain, whether he can win or not is two things. That being the case, why not let your son fight? Go and fight with his cousin. In this way, the history will be much more fun. After choosing the name, Edward thought about it. It must be very interesting to record the dispute between the two Charlies in history. As the saying goes, when good things come, they come in clusters, and children are also piled up. Not long after his eldest son was born, several other women also gave birth to several illegitimate children. Lucy gave birth to his second daughter, the fifth eldest, named Isabella Tudor. Luna gave birth to his fourth son, the sixth, named John Tudor. Emma gave birth to his fifth son, the seventh oldest, named George Tudor. Thus, in 1558, Edward had 5 sons and 2 daughters so far. The eldest son, Henry Tudor, was born on December 10, 1555, at the age of 3. The second son, Adam Tudor, was born on December 12, 1555, at the age of 3. The third son, Charlie Tudor, was born on September 1, 1558. The fourth son, John Tudor, was born on October 3, 1558. The fifth son, George Tudor, was born on November 8, 1558. The eldest daughter, Alice Tudor, was born on December 10, 1555. The second daughter, Isabella Tudor, was born on November 10, 1558. Of course, as soon as these illegitimate children were born, Edward gave each of them 2 manors and a ranch. The most important thing is the nominal eldest son, the king's only heir, Charles Tudor. Just 3 days after he was baptized, he was still in a state of ignorance, and he was conferred the title of Prince of Wales and Duke of Cornwall by Edward in Westminster Abbey. In other words, if nothing else, he is the Prince of England. Then, Edward and Mary canonized him as Dauphin of Scotland at Westminster Abbey, and held many earlships concurrently. In this way, unless he died, the United Kingdom of Britain was basically in his pocket. This year, His Majesty the Great King was 22, and Queen Mary was 17. With the landing of the Crown Prince, the entire United Kingdom suddenly and inexplicably stabilized. Yes, Edward felt that way in the past, although the United Kingdom was established. For the nobles, if there was no safe heir, it would be a hanging garden, a castle built on mud and sand, which could not withstand wind and rain. However, since the birth of Charles, the Irish aristocracy has become more loyal, and Ireland's original actions of resisting the central government from time to time have gradually disappeared. Moreover, almost all Scottish nobles moved to London, and the marriage of Scottish nobles and English nobles also slowly unfolded. Edward can proudly say that if he is given 20 years, Scotland will be fully integrated into the United Kingdom and, more importantly, tribes from the Scottish Highlands came to London to swear allegiance to Edward and Mary at this point, after the Scottish Lowlands came under the rule. The more extensive Highlands finally joined the United Kingdom. In this regard, Edward was very happy to recruit 2,000 people from the Highland area to form the Scottish Highland Guards to guard the palace and protect the royal family. The Scottish Highlanders are tall and ferocious, and most of them are dead-brained and simple-minded. So they are more suitable as a guard force. Scottish mercenaries were also popular in Europe for a while, and played an important role in the colonial expansion of the British Empire. New developments have also been made in Ireland, where the second full expansion is slowly starting to unfold. The land developed has reached 1 million acres, 53,000 immigrants, more than 130 naturalized tribes, and a population of 130,000. In another 5 years, the whole of Ireland will basically be completely incorporated into the United Kingdom. In this regard, Edward can proudly announce that he has accomplished something that other British kings cannot do, and can be compared to Qin Shi Huang of China. And it is not unreasonable to be called the greatest king in British history. 1558 was also the harvest year for Edward. Chapter 416 Knights and number 039, Conference. The time came to June 1559. In order to celebrate the signing of the Cateau-Cambrésis peace treaty and the princess's wedding, according to the French aristocratic tradition, Henry II decided to hold a grand knightly tournament in Paris. Speaking of this, I believe everyone is familiar with the Cavaliers. A knight, as the name suggests, is a warrior on a horse. Before the 8th century, infantry was the protagonist on the European battlefield. Until the 7th century, the Arab cavalry who conquered the quartet had used stirrups. In 711, the Arab cavalry crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and entered Europe. The Franks and the Germans learned to use stirrups almost at the same time. Stirrups not only make the cavalry and the horse better integrated, but also completely liberate the cavalry's hands, so that they can use weapons as they like. In this way, the cavalry has become a human bullet with strong impact. There was a proverb at the time, a Frank on a horse can punch a hole in the walls of Babylon. The rise of cavalry gradually replaced the dominance of infantry on the battlefield. Therefore, war is really the main way of cultural exchange, and Westerners should also thank the Arabs. Since the collapse of the Roman Empire, the fiefdom system has prevailed in the world, and the core of the fiefdom system is knights. If we compare countries at that time, it is not based on the size of the economy, but the number of knights they have as the standard. There is a saying that not all nobles are knights, but all knights are nobles. Strictly speaking, training a knight is very strict, takes a long time, and requires a lot of manpower and material resources. Ordinary people would follow a knight at the age of 14 and become a servant. And then they would be considered a real knight when they were appreciated by the lord at the age of 14 and had a fief among them, being taken in by a knight. I don't know how many children of ordinary civilians were stuck. In addition, the knights fought every day, and the knights could be treated preferentially by the captives, while the attendants faced death directly. This road is the most difficult and the main road. The second way is to participate in the martial arts tournament. The so-called martial arts tournament, that is to say, let a group of wandering knights, that is, a group of reserved knights without fiefs, usually the sons of nobles who have no inheritance rights, come to the competition to choose the winner and be selected. Selected by nobles, canonized as knights. This is the easiest and most convenient. However, it is not universal, and ordinary people can only suffer in silence. As a kingdom of knights, the news that His Majesty the King is going to hold a knights meeting quickly spread throughout Europe. France, England, Germany, Spain, and Italy, countries with strong knight culture. Those preparatory knights rode horses and boats, and went to France continuously to participate in the knights meeting, expecting to be loved by His Majesty the King in one fell swoop and become real knights. Knight the Principality of Lorraine, a small town at this time, as the two most noble people in the town. Knight Bernard and Knight Bastien looked into the distance with excited faces. Just now, the two of them bid farewell to their son. Tell me, old Bernard, there must be a lot of people coming to this knights conference in France. Can your son do it? Bastien blinked, looked into the distance, and said to the Bernard knight, who was still a little sad, who knows, that kid insists on going, and I can't stop him. What did he say? That the whole of Europe will definitely see the style of the Bernard family. Speaking of which, Although Knight Vern felt a little excited in his heart, he was more worried his son was the eldest son in the family, and he had spent a lot of effort in training him. This time, he went to the night meeting, not seeking honor, but returning safely yet. I advised my kid not to go. It's dangerous, but when I think about it, when he gets older, he will still go out, so why not go out now? Knight Bastion sighed. Although most knights are injured in martial arts competitions, and there is no danger of death, these young people sometimes engage in life and death duels because of the instigation of a few women, especially during the martial arts tournament. There are a large number of beautiful ladies and young and energetic trainee knights. How can they bear it? At the same time, the two trainee knights who had just left the house were full of excitement and showed no worries. Charles, do you think that after we go to Paris, we can be appreciated by the king and canonized as knights? David Jean Bastion, who is relatively young, only 16 years old this year, asked Charles, who was riding a big white horse with some anxiety. Of course. I will definitely get the marriage of all noble ladies and become a knight respected by everyone. There was a different kind of brilliance on Shire's handsome face, and he stared at the front with piercing eyes, and said proudly, as for you? You are still young and lack strength. Let's go this time and simply accumulate experience. Leave the limelight to me. Charles turned his head, looked at the thin David, and then at his immature face, shook his head, and said with curled lips, "Ah." David heard this, looked at his thin arms, then at Charles' thick body, lowered his head, and became discouraged. However, David, it won't work this time. Just wait until the next time. You will definitely be able to become a knight. Seeing his companion like this, Charles comforted his conscience. Only then did David lift his spirits, and he followed Charles, each with a servant beside him, and rode forward on horseback. The poor two servants rode on two donkeys, seeing the two young masters who were speeding up, hurriedly urged them to catch up. By the time David and Chart arrived in Paris, it was already June 29th, and the deadline for registration was almost over. Charles and David patted their chests with lingering fear. And they finally came here, so don't turn it into a game. After signing up, the two of them searched all the hostels in Paris, but every one was full, and the price of living also soared to 1 silver coin per night. In this way, Charles and David searched and searched, and only rented 2 houses. After paying the fee for a week, they settled down with his eyes closed. David is still reminiscing about today's crowded registration. The huge number of knights and reserve knights personally reported their family names and family crests to the registrar, pressed their fingerprints, and explained some rules. It was extremely cumbersome, he roughly counted. At that time, the number of people signing up had already exceeded 100. One could imagine what a spectacular scene tomorrow would be. Thinking of this, he was so excited that he couldn't sleep. Even though he knew that he was hopeless, seeing such a scene would be a good material to brag about in the future. Chapter 417 Tournament. The next day, that is, June 20th, early in the morning, David and Charles arrived at the Place des Vosges in Paris with all their equipment, which was the scene of the nightly tournament. When David and Charles arrived, the entire square was already filled with colorful flags and crowded with people. The scene was very spectacular as knights participating in the battle. Charles and David dressed up and came to the players' field. Fortunately, although they came on the last day, they were drawn on the first day. Unfortunately, although the battle can be ended as soon as possible, the disadvantages are also obvious. On the first day, everyone's attention was actually on the battle between His Majesty the King of France and the noble knights. For the noble ladies, His Majesty the King and the noble knights were the most popular. Not many people watched their games at all, and more importantly, they are sparring partners, completely supporting roles. Of course, the two fledgling young people don't know these twists and turns at all. They just know that today is the time for their fate to choose to defeat the opponent, gain the favor of the nobles, and then become a knight respected by everyone, or lose the game and become a spectator. Of course, I worked so hard to come to Paris not to watch other people's games, but to make myself the protagonist. Looking at the people who were competing with them at the same time, they all sighed, which made the two of them a little puzzled. There was no reason to sigh before the competition, although they were full of doubts, but as pink and tender newcomers, the two of them were too embarrassed to ask further, so they could only lead the horse and calm its emotions. The more than 100 contestants stayed within their own range, while the rest of the square was almost occupied by crowds of onlookers. Ordinary onlookers, with their heads stretched out, kept looking around in the crowd, looking at the center of the square, for fear of missing something. The peddlers brought things, snacks, drinks, and even the clothes of a famous outer knight, and shouted loudly, but compared with the voices of the crowd, they were still too small. Moreover, on the periphery of the square, The major casinos also set up odds one after another, including those slightly famous nights for everyone to choose inside and outside the arena. It was extremely lively, and those nobles and ladies who appreciate the performance have their own exclusive high platform. Sit there and watch the knights fight condescendingly. The participating knights stayed near the high platform, and when they looked up, they could see the figure of the delicate and beautiful lady on the high platform, with every frown and smile, beautiful and beautiful, ordinary and ripe peaches, sweet and alluring, tempting these young people who were about to compete. Knights, however, the participating knights, who were a bit decadent in spirit before, felt as if they had taken a stimulant after seeing those beautiful ladies. The nobles gradually took their seats according to their status. Finally, as the protagonist of today's game, His Majesty King Henry II of France and his queen entered the arena together. See His Majesty the King. All the knights and nobles bowed and saluted, while the ladies held their skirts and shouted loudly. The onlookers also knew that His Majesty the King was coming, and knelt down on their knees to welcome His Majesty the King. In fact, at the end of the Middle Ages, kneeling on one knee is only the right of nobles and those with status. It is the most basic etiquette for ordinary civilians to kneel when they meet lords and nobles. Of course, with the passage of time and the popularization of culture, the number of common people kneeling down has become less and less. Seeing the huge crowd in front of him salute to him, Henry II's mood became more and more cheerful. When he and the Queen sat on their seats, the entire tournament officially began. First of all, the contestants were noble knights from the French court. It is not so much a contest as a performance. The palace knights wore green hair one by one, their armor was gorgeous and shiny, and they walked into the performance stage with great arrogance as French court knights. They are proud, different from other court knights. These people are the most powerful knights in France, and they are the knights most loved by His Majesty the King today. As soon as this group of brave and handsome knights entered the arena, the whole square was completely boiling. When the ordinary people saw such a handsome knight approaching, they immediately made a noise, howling and cheering. Anyway, it was right to shout loudly. All the ladies, including the Queen of France, shouted loudly to the knights they supported, and kept blowing kisses, interacting frequently. The aristocratic husbands beside the ladies pretended not to see them, and looked ahead indifferently, including their boss, His Majesty Henry II. For these male nobles, as long as their wives give birth to a legal heir, they can play with their wives however they want, even if thousands of people sleep and 10,000 people ride. It doesn't matter. They themselves are obsessed with being in love every day, with a lot of mistresses. How can they have time to care about these? So, for this kind of scene, don't make a fuss in the square. 100 or so of the bravest and best knights in France began the performances, and the more than 100 knights facing them, seeing the majestic bodies and gorgeous armor of these court knights, felt timid in their hearts. The same is true for Charles and David from the Principality of Lorraine, not to mention the steeds under their crotches. They are superior to others like me, and looking at their arms thicker than their own thighs, it is conceivable that they are extremely powerful. As expected, the 200 people fought each other. After more than an hour, the victory of the court knights basically ended with the victory of the palace knights. Of course, there were rare cases where the court knights were killed, but unfortunately, it didn't happen this time. As soon as Charles went back and forth, he was hit to the ground by the court knight with a spear. With the help of his servants, he slowly stood up and took off his armor. Charles picked up his clothes, only to see a fist-sized bruise on his chest. It hurts when he touched it lightly. David on the other side was knocked down by the opponent's shield and fell off the horse because of lack of strength. This made David very embarrassed. Is a knight without strength still a knight? The two looked at each other with helpless smiles, then stood up and watched the group of court knights who eliminated them fight each other. To be honest, Charles had to admit that these court knights were not only powerful, but also very beautiful and exciting in fighting, which was very eye-catching. Different from them, these knights sparred much longer than them, and some of them were even on equal footing, rested for a while, and then continued. By the time it was finally over, it was already noon. As the most anticipated, it is also the finale appearance of His Majesty King Henry II of France. With the help of his servants, he is preparing to put on his armor and perform a battle performance. Chapter 418, The King Plays. Henry II's father, King François I of France, was keen on making contributions and had great ambitions, so he frequently used troops because he often took the lead and personally experienced the battlefield. He was regarded as a model knight by his subordinates and became the darling of many bards. As his son, Henry II naturally developed a hobby of knights since he was a child. In France, a country with a strong knight culture, a knight king is more likely to be respected and supported by his subjects, which is of no avail to the rule of the royal family. Harmful therefore, in his youth, Henry II was keen on jousting with spears and tried to become a knight when he was 15 years old. He fell madly in love with a 35-year-old widow 20 years older than him, Diane de Poitiers, 1499 to 1566. Of course, this kind of situation is very common. Young muey women of the same age are all shriveled. What's so good about it? In order to express his love, the young and impulsive Henry, he insisted on tying Diana's ribbon, not his wife's, on the spear during the joust in order to dedicate victory to his beauty. Although the move broke the heart of his wife, Catherine de' Medici, it was, in a way, medieval chivalry. Chivalry has always been admired by His Majesty the King as the finale performance. Henry II was looking forward to and excited as a king, especially a Night King. It has been a long time since I have experienced fighting in front of so many people. Today I can finally show my skills and let the subjects of the whole France look at me. His Majesty the King is about to show his might with the help of the servant. His Majesty Henry's mount has been put on armor and a horse helmet specially made for it. Looking at the helmet in front of him, Henry stroked it gently, feeling the cold touch, which looked like an ancient dragon, which made Henry overjoyed. Your Majesty, please forgive my presumptuousness, but I beg you, please do not participate in this dangerous knightly battle. After all, you are the King of France. On the side, his Queen Catherine de' Medici stood aside, holding his golden helmet in her hand, and said with a worried face. Henry II glanced at his queen, with an undisguised look of disgust in his eyes, grabbed the helmet, and said disdainfully, "It's just a martial arts competition. What's so scary? Even though I'm 40 years old, I'm still the most powerful knight in France." For the needs of the competition, Henry II ordered a large number of weapons and armor, and established his own palace weapons and armor workshop accordingly. Employing many skilled craftsmen from France, Flanders, and Italy, and quite a few of the works have been preserved to this day. He glanced at his queen slightly, with a disgusted expression on his face. To be honest, Henry II has always hated the queen. Beside him, his father, Francois I, suffered repeated defeats in the war against Spain, and the court was already on the verge of bankruptcy. In order to obtain a large amount of wealth, his father married his second son, Henry II, to the Medici family, a banker with wealth and power. In Italy, money can turn ghosts around. In order to save his court, Henry was sold by his father in this way. You said, "It's okay if she is beautiful, but the key is that she is fat and short, and has nothing but money." If it weren't for the fact that she gave birth to several heirs for herself, Henry II would have wanted to imitate England's Henry VIII and abolish the Queen. Don't bother me anymore. Go to the high stage and let you see my performance. Moment. Henry II waved his hand and drove his wife away. Seeing this, Queen Medici opened her mouth, and after seeing her husband's disgusted face, she could only leave with her maid. The servants began to put on the armor for His Majesty the King one by one, which was very cumbersome. On the side, Gabriel, Earl of Montgomery, the King's close bodyguard, the kingdom's most trusted Scottish Guard captain, as the captain of the Scottish Guard, the most elite guard in France. Gabriel looks majestic and powerful, with a handsome face, which fits the image of the knight in the poem very well at this time. He was about to put on his armor, but suddenly received a letter sent on parchment, which made his complexion change drastically, gradually turning pale. "What's the matter with you, my lord?" The attendant at the side saw that his master's expression was not right, and asked with concern, "It's nothing. Continue to help me put on the armor." Gabriel shook his head with a forced smile, and asked the attendant to continue working in this regard. The attendant can only continue to serve him in the troublesome full-body armor, and his mount is no exception. Suddenly a servant came over and asked flatteringly, "Master Earl, I wonder if you are ready? His Majesty the King is urging you. It will be ready soon. Please wait a moment, Your Majesty." Gabriel responded with a smile. As soon as the servant came over picking up his helmet, Gabriel got on the horse with the support of his attendants under the blessing of the double strength of the body armor and the back. The horse slowly walked towards the center of the competition, and there, His Majesty the King had been waiting for a long time. I saw colorful feathers on His Majesty's mount and his own helmet. Looking at the armor, this is His Majesty's favorite golden lion armor. Under the direct sunlight at noon, it is gold, and the carvings on the armor are extremely complicated and delicate, and the vine-like decorations have an Arabic style, especially on the shoulder armor, each depicting a lion's head, and the sideburns almost extend to the chest. Majestic and majestic. The pattern on the breastplate shows a Roman warrior accepting weapons presented as tribute by two women. My Lord Earl, I hope you will show your true level and don't let me down. He knew the king very well. Henry II was eager to win, and he would never allow himself to openly let the water in a contest under the eyes of everyone. "Yes, Your Majesty, Please forgive my rudeness," Gabriel said angrily afterwards. Gabriel took the wooden spear and wooden shield from the attendants because it is different from actual combat. The contests here all use spears with wooden handles, which are umbrella-shaped and brightly colored usually. 2 knights hold a shield in their left hand and a spear in their right hand. After a long sprint, they flat-end the spear and give the opponent a hard blow. Experienced knights usually attack the opponent's neck armor, helmet gaps and shield handles, etc. Weakness: if you touch it, you will win because spears with wooden handles are easy to break under a huge impact. They are often one-off, and the victory or defeat is often in a flash. Next to the two, the clown performed without fear, and the audience watched the contest between His Majesty the King and the captain of the Scottish Guard with great anticipation, which was really exciting. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419: The Mystery of the Death of Henry II. Through the gaps in the armor, Henry II felt that he was in excellent condition, and he would definitely show off today. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his legs were lightly clamped. Henry II had expected that he would definitely win and receive the enthusiasm of thousands of ladies. Thinking of this, Henry II couldn't help but smile softly. The clown who was performing at the side seemed to hear His Majesty's laughter, and couldn't help but stand up with hairs, and couldn't help shivering. He couldn't help turning his head back, and after glancing at the glittering gold in His Majesty, he quietly moved a few steps away. It's dangerous to get too close. The audience also fell silent. At this moment, the entire square seemed to press the pause button. Everyone stared at the front with breathless attention, watching this or that famous night king in Europe heroic on the high platform. All the nobles also stretched their heads, watching the two players competing on the field, especially Her Majesty. She always felt that something important happened in her heart today. She stared at her husband closely without daring to blink. She knew that Henry II hated her and didn't want to be his queen himself. However, which girl is not pregnant? But she is deeply in love with her husband, the Night King. The girl's dream came true. But the boy Henry suffered on the other side. As the king's opponent, Gabriel watched His Majesty the King galloping over on horseback through the slits of his eyes. Gabriel made a few turns in his mind. He gritted his teeth involuntarily, clamped his legs lightly, and the horse under his crotch galloped swiftly. The audience only saw that when His Majesty the King and the captain of the Scottish Guards were sprinting towards each other. Gabriel aimed at the king's helmet as he did in usual training, and stabbed hard. Boom! The king on the horse was thrown to the ground, lying there, his body writhing uncontrollably. The horse continued to sprint forward, as if it was just a competition, and Gabriel stared blankly at the wooden spearhead in his hand shattered into pieces. His face full of disbelief. Then he turned his horse's head in an emergency and ran towards the fallen king. The clown performing on the sidelines and the servants also stared blankly at the fallen king, and immediately ran over quickly. The queen and the nobles on the high platform immediately ran down regardless of their appearance, ready to go over to comfort His Majesty the King. Yes, that's right. Everyone thought that His Majesty the King would definitely fight on equal terms with the captain of the Scottish Guards, and who knew that he would be thrown off the horse in one round. Everyone knows that the king's self-esteem is very strong, and he is very sad after failure, so they are all ready to comfort him and feel his presence, and only Her Majesty the Queen feels that this matter is not that simple. Sure enough, just as everyone stepped down from the high platform, the servant found a lot of blood flowing out of His Majesty's helmet, so he hurriedly stepped forward to report to the Queen and the nobles, His Majesty the King is injured. At this moment, all the nobles seemed to be hit by a heavy hammer, trembling all over. Unable to tell whether they were happy or sad. In short, there's only one sentence in everyone's mind: the big thing is not good. But the onlookers didn't know it. They thought His Majesty the King fell off his horse and was injured. This is very common in the arena, so one by one happily left the square, not knowing what this match meant. What happened at the moment of hand-to-hand combat has become an eternal historical mystery. All that was seen was that the king's spear slid past the captain of the guard, and Gabriel's spearhead suddenly hit the king's helmet and was shattered. The king fell from his horse and fell to the ground. His Majesty the King was sent to the palace urgently, and the imperial doctors also rushed to the palace to diagnose and treat His Majesty the King. The armor of His Majesty the King had been removed by the servants long ago, and he was lying on the velvet bed with his eyes closed. Unable to speak, the maids at the side kept bringing towels and wiped the wound on the corner of His Majesty's eye. The blood had already soaked the entire bed quilt. The queen stayed by her side, looking at her husband who was watching her injury, with tears in the corners of her eyes, covering her lips, sobbing softly. The high-ranking French noble stood in the room with solemn and worried expressions. The imperial doctors checked His Majesty the King's body up and down, left and right, back and forth, and came to the conclusion that something had entered His Majesty's brain. Then I went to the scene to investigate. Although the king was protected by heavy armor and the spear did not have a metal spear point, a broken piece of wood happened to pass through the gap in the helmet, pierced the king's eyeball, and reached deep into the brain. Under the medical conditions at the time, there was no cure for this, so the imperial doctors collectively showed their cards to the queen. His Majesty the King cannot be saved, so prepare for the funeral. What? Even this injury can't be healed. What use are you imperial doctors for me? Hearing that her husband was about to pass away soon, Her Majesty the Queen couldn't bear it any more, and scolded loudly. But the imperial doctors were trembling and begging for mercy. Of course, in this era, when doctors are scarce, the nobles dare not kill the imperial physician. Who knows what kind of illness they will have in the future, and what will happen to them after killing the imperial physician. You must know that who can become an imperial doctor is not the best in the same industry. Therefore, although they were scared on the surface, the imperial doctors were still calm in their hearts. At this moment, Henry II woke up. When he opened his eyes, he only felt that something had entered his head. The feeling was very sharp, and it was very painful. Your Majesty, you're awake. The Queen walked over immediately, wiped away her tears, and said, and the important ministers of the kingdom on the side also approached and looked at the king, who was dying during this period of time. He finally realized that something had finally entered his head, and more importantly, he was going to see God soon. My God, I really don't want to see you. Henry II could not help crying in his heart. Taking advantage of the time he was awake, he quickly arranged for the afterlife. In fact, there is nothing to arrange. His eldest son has grown up, and there is no suspense for the crown prince to take the throne. He then asked Gabriel, who is responsible for his death. Your Majesty, someone must have ordered this criminal. Please let us find out who is behind him. The important minister of the kingdom, the Duke of Guise, said in a deep voice, no, let him go. After saying this, Henry II took a breath and said softly, I know he's innocent. It's normal for a knight to have an accident. A real knight should have expected it long ago. Don't blame the past. Besides, he has followed me for so many years and is my closest guard, so how could he betray me? What reason would he betray me? Unable to bear the order of the king, the ministers and the queen had no choice but to release Gabriel. As for the captain of the Scottish Guard, he should not think about it. 10 days later, the strong Henry II passed away for the first time because of septicemia. Don't mention the crying queen, just talk about Gabriel. The pardoned captain of the Scots Guards ironically later converted to Protestantism, fought against Henry II's sons, and was eventually captured and executed during Henry II's reign. Chapter 420 Responses from all parties. The death of Henry II did not bring anything to France, and the entire kingdom was as peaceful as ever afterwards. The eldest son of Henry II ascended the throne in Reims Cathedral. At the age of 15, he was called Francois II. Soon the news of Henry II's visit to God reached London, and our king was overjoyed at this time. Edward was receiving the Highlander envoys from Scotland, or in other words, the pilgrimage offerings of several tribes this year. Every year, gifts are given to the king to serve as taxes for these gifts. They were nothing more than animal furs, and Edward really didn't like them. Scotland is most famous for Scotch whisky and Highland warriors, especially for Highland fighters. In this era where cold weapons are still dominant, the source of strong soldiers is the key to the victory of the army. Edward smiled like a spring breeze, and received the representatives of these Highlanders, and a translator was invited, and the two had a cordial conversation, the content of which was to firmly support His Majesty the King and be loyal to His Majesty the King. According to the usual practice, Edward also rewarded some items, including paper, Bible, and some ironware. Although the value of the items is asymmetrical, this is to generalize these tribes and let them serve the kingdom wholeheartedly. In other words, although these Highlanders are rebellious, they often fight with each other and rebel from time to time. However, if outsiders come to beat their loyal masters, they will stubbornly support their masters, preferring to die rather than submit. For example, in the Stuart dynasty in history, after James II was honored by the Glorious Revolution, his daughter and son-in-law came to the throne. And then his daughter Queen Anne, and after that, the Parliament suddenly elected an Earl of Hanover from Germany as king, and James II's son was abandoned. This is not bad. The Highlanders have always supported James II and his heirs. Even in the 18th century, the British government became stronger and stronger, but the Highlanders still chose to riot and revolt. This kind of silly and cute spirit is exactly what Edward appreciates. Europe is not good at this point. There is no spirit of loyalty to the monarch at all. The mind is full of God, and there is no loyal thinking in the mind. It's better to be a savage. With a single mind, Edward relied on the translator to talk to these tribal envoys. Thinking about it in his mind, thinking of this, Edward hastily ordered, when they go back, send them a card of silk. Silk was originally only produced in the East, but who told the Ottoman Empire to get stuck? In desperation, the Europeans began to study on their own and developed imitation silk. Although the quality of silk was inferior to that of the East, it was still widely welcomed in Europe. Of course, Edward is not good at silk, but there are people in Italy who can just buy a few craftsmen and come to England, which is much better than glass. Yes, Your Majesty. The personal secretary at the side hastily recorded it in the notebook, and then handed it over to the secretariat. Your Majesty. A man came running from the secretariat suddenly, and Edward waved his hand to send the tribal envoys away before letting him speak. What's up? French King Henry VIII has passed away, and the 15-year-old Dauphin ascends the throne as Francois II. Really? This is really good news. Edward clapped his hands happily when he heard the news. It was nothing more than Edward being so excited because the young king only knew that a religious civil war would break out in France in the 16th century, and the whole country had been fighting for decades. That was a mess, but he wasn't sure when it was. But Henry VII's sudden death at this time, don't think about it, the religious war must be a certain period of time in the future, just a few years next. It won't take long for a religious civil war to break out in France, and then it will be a good opportunity for him to fish in troubled waters. In today's Europe, the largest country is Spain, which controls a huge territory and has a strong military force. The second largest country is France, which holds great economic power and population. The third is Edward's United Kingdom. The military economy is medium, and the two are balanced. Don't be afraid of Spain. Although its territory is large, it has a piece in the east and a piece in the west. Sooner or later, it will have to say goodbye, but France is different. Today's France basically maintains a unified situation, and it has the largest population at this time. The population of France has reached 18 million, the population of Britain is more than 4 million, and the population of Spain is more than 8 million combined. Spain and the United Kingdom do not have as many countries as France, so France has the greatest war potential. Such a huge population made Edward's heart itch. The reason why he hasn't colonized the Americas until now is because the population is insufficient. The current population can't even satisfy the factories, let alone colonize the Americas. Ireland is a bit too much. Thinking of this, Edward realized that he was going to prepare for the war next. Where would he eat such a delicious meal? Normandy or Brittany? At this time, Spain, Madrid. Philip II, who had been busy all the time, also heard the news. His Majesty the King was hugging his son, excited and deeply moved. This was his first heir, and it might be his last. The more he looked at the little guy, the more Philip felt pity. After kissing him on the forehead, Philip II turned around and received the messenger. What's the matter? Philip II asked majestically. Interrupting the time to play with his son is not a trivial matter, Your Majesty. King Henry VIII of France has passed away and his son has ascended the throne. What? Is this true? Philip II couldn't help asking, his face full of searching. Yes, Your Majesty. Henry II was stabbed in the eye by a piece of wood in a fight with Gabriel, captain of the Scottish Guards, and died after suffering for 10 days. The attendant glanced at His Majesty the King and continued, very good, really great. The annoying Henry II has finally passed away. After Henry II ascended the throne, he continued to oppose Charles V, and after Philip II inherited the throne, he continued to fight. Although he won the war in Italy, his court was bankrupt as a result. The shameless Philip II directly declared to his creditors that the court was bankrupt. This was the third bankruptcy since he ascended the throne in 1556. His Majesty the King announced the bankruptcy of the palace, which directly made the bankers who borrowed money speechless, and the debt could only be dragged on. This gave the bankers in Genoa a deep experience. The one who is in debt is the famous saying of the uncle. Tell those Genoese bankers that the King of France is dead, and I want to borrow another sum of money from them. There was a smile on Philip II's face, and he announced to the attendant, without any sense of shame, a 15-year-old king. It is difficult for France to think about it, Philip II thought silently. Chapter 421. The Hunting Banner. Kill. Kill these English dogs. Kill. 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 Let's go together. Go. For the tribe, for the family, everyone. AWW. Beside the stacks of a fortress wall, young soldiers couldn't help looking up. The sparse crowd was holding all kinds of weapons, men, women, children, old people, about a few hundred people, shouting that they couldn't hear knowing the language. He sprinted towards the castle looking at the layer after layer of corpses under the fortress, and silently watching the other disgraced companions around him. The young soldier sighed softly, not knowing whether it was fear or joy. "Hey, dude, don't be afraid. The castle we built is 30 feet high, the tallest and strongest castle in the whole of southern Ireland, and those Kate barbarians can't attack it." On the side, the veteran with blood on his arm licked his chapped lips and said with a smile. The young soldier turned his head involuntarily, and saw a young soldier with flaxen curly hair sitting on the city wall with his buttocks, and laughed softly with his mouth open. Seeing his calm appearance, the young soldier couldn't help puffing out his chest, and said loudly, "Who's scared? I'm just wondering why those Kate savages don't feel afraid. Could it be that we have killed so many people, and the city walls are covered with corpses? They don't have any fear at all, and they are still rushing forward recklessly." As soon as the young soldier finished speaking, he immediately felt that there were several pairs of eyes staring at him sternly, as if they were about to eat him. He shrank his neck and sat on the spot. After a while, he felt his eyes leave him, and when he looked up, the veteran in front of him was looking at him with teasing eyes, which made him a little impatient, and gave him a hard look. Who knows, this not only didn't take it seriously, but laughed, covering his stomach and laughing. Seeing this appearance, the young soldier turned his head angrily, and looked at the scene of being shot and killed by the archers under the city wall. "Hey, buddy, do you know why you were hostile just now?" The veteran looked at the sulking recruit, stopped smiling, moved his buttocks, and said to him. Hearing this, the young soldier, who didn't want to talk to him before, could no longer be angry, turned his head, widened his eyes, and asked curiously, "Why, he?" The old soldier smiled, pressed the young soldier's head over, and said with his lips to his ear, "Because it is the Kate people who are hostile to you." "What?" The young soldier showed an unbelievable expression. Although his face was ashamed, his eyes were wide open, and his blue eyes could be clearly seen, like stars in the sky. "Very beautiful. This must be a handsome boy." The veteran thought silently in his heart. "Keep your voice down." The veteran quickly showed a cautious look, and reminded, "These Kate people are different from the Kate people under the city wall. They are all from the Kate tribe in the northern province of Alt, and they took refuge in us, so they were sent here to guard the city for us. So, be careful in the future. Don't swear at people casually, especially don't implicate them. These people are very powerful characters in fighting," the veteran said with lingering fear. His voice was still trembling slightly, and he glanced around, as if he was afraid of being heard. "Oh, I see." The young soldier glanced at the people beside him and replied cautiously, "By the way, little guy, where are you from?" The old soldier glanced at the young man and asked, "I'm from Scotland, but I'm from the lowlands, and I can speak English." The young soldier said wistfully, "You are a Scot. Why did you come to Ireland?" The veteran asked curiously, "Oh, isn't this the establishment of the United Kingdom? His Majesty the King established a United Kingdom army, and I wandered around the streets, but I was arrested." The young soldier said angrily, "My brother and parents must still be at home when I go back? Damn the army. I'm only 16 years old this year, and I'm not married yet. I wasn't caught, but I was drunk, lying on the side of the road, and was dragged directly by the army. When I woke up in a daze, I arrived at the barracks." The veteran waved his hand helplessly and said, "Oh." The two side heavily. Recruiting people to serve as soldiers is a tradition both at home and abroad, especially in Europe, where wars have been going on for years. Coupled with the extremely bad medical environment, the death rate of soldiers remains high, and there is no pension, so people are very afraid of being a soldier. No way, even if Edward increased the salaries of soldiers and added pensions, but influenced by traditional concepts, no one wanted to be a professional soldier unless the king conscripted the militia. The army is better, but the navy has really added more money, and not many people are willing to join. The weather at sea, pirates, disease, and harsh environments are the threshold for young lads to stop even later. When Britain became the era of the empire on which the sun never sets, most of the sailors in the British Navy who had won many battles did not join voluntarily, so everyone travels back to that era. Just be careful. Come on. Kill. The two were talking, and suddenly a louder voice came from their ears. "Everyone get up. A large enemy army is coming. Get ready." The commander on the city wall shouted loudly. The young soldiers and veterans quickly got up and looked down. All the original calm expressions disappeared. I saw a group of ants-like crowd running towards the castle, like the waves of the sea, running towards the castle unstoppably, majestic. A few siege vehicles were pushed forward slowly by hundreds of people. There were thousands of cavalry in the front row, majestic and majestic. The remaining Kate infantry brandished various weapons. Although the expressions on their faces were unclear, they don't think about it. It must be extremely hideous looking from the front to the back. The endless human heads make one's scalp numb, and even cover up the brilliance of the sun in the sky. Once there are more than 10,000 people, there is no limit. Impossible, this is impossible. The old soldier kept muttering, with an expression of disbelief on his face. What's wrong? The young soldier asked hastily. You just came here. I'm afraid you don't know that there are almost no tribes with a population of more than 10,000 in Ireland, but this time, based on my experience, there are at least tens of thousands of people. This time we may be in danger, the veteran sighed with sadness on his face. Including the tribes that attacked the city a few days ago, there is not such a large tribal alliance on the island of Ireland. I am afraid that this is all the tribes left in Ireland. Sure enough, what the old soldier said was right. This group of tribal allied forces did not immediately attack the city, but set up tents quite methodically. I saw dozens of various tribal flags fluttering against the wind, hunting and hunting, looking extremely spectacular. Chapter 422 The Last Chance. In the eyes of the young soldiers, the Irish people under the city walls were almost the same as the Scottish people, with almost the same language and clothes. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, the young soldiers would not have believed it. These savages turned out to be the same nation as themselves. Oh, my God, am I of the same stock as these savages? Shame on me. The young soldier looked at the wall of people below, thinking unwillingly. In fact, not only the Irish, but even the Welsh are the same as the Scots. They are the same nation originally. England was dominated by the Celts. After the Romans came, they occupied England and drove the Cate people to the cold north and southwest mountains, as well as the nearby Irish island. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, European barbarians came again and continued to drive the Cate people away, and then fused the genes of the Romans and some of the Cate people to form today's Anglo-Saxons, that is, the English. My God. My God. God bless. The castle guarded by only 2,000 soldiers was suddenly overwhelmed by the huge army in front of them. The first thing almost everyone did was to pray to God. In the only stronghold in Kilmorach County, Munster Province is also the largest stronghold. As the chief of this stronghold, John Perrott feels a lot of pressure inexplicably, especially under his monocular. Those Kipes actually had a siege engine at this time, which made him take a deep breath. In the past, no matter how many people came to attack the city, Sir John didn't worry at all. As one of the most cutting-edge strongholds, this is the strongest castle in Munster Province. It took 5,000 people and took half a year to build it. It is indestructible. Moreover, in the past, the Celtics were unable to attack, and after a stalemate for 3 or 4 days, they would take the initiative to retreat due to lack of food and grass. This time, what did he see? Carloads of food and grass were sent to the camp that was being repaired. Although traces of battle could still be seen in the Celtic camp, it was much better than before. At this point, John came to a conclusion in his mind. The Celtics were not good. Judging from this, it is very likely that the entire stronghold will be captured. Thinking of this, Sir John couldn't help having a headache. Since the last time, because of the strength of the colonization, he was received by His Majesty the King and appointed as the head of the colonization of Munster Province, commanding the army of 14 strongholds in the 7 counties of Munster Province. It can be said that a big step has been taken directly. In addition, Lemire Watson was appointed as the head of the colonization of Leinster Province. Because of his outstanding performance, this is what John envies the most, because Dublin is in the province of Leinster, and it is easiest to achieve results by performing beside the governor. The province of Munster, where he is located, is the southwestern part of the island of Ireland. And it is also the place where the Celtics have the most settlements. Come on. His Excellency shouted loudly, "My lord." Someone ran over from outside immediately and replied respectfully, "Has the messenger you sent come back?" Sir John naturally asked for support from all over the country when his parents attacked the city. "My lord, currently only Waterford County, North Tipperary County, South Tipperary County, and Clare County can support. What about the rest of the counties?" Frowning, Jazz had a bad feeling in his heart. News came from Kerry County and Cork County. They also suffered a large-scale Celtic attack and were unable to send troops to support them. County Kerry and County Cork are located at the southernmost tip of the island of Ireland, and are naturally the areas where the Celts mainly live. If the 2 counties are breached, the consequences will be disastrous, and his future may be in vain. Thinking of this, Sir John's frown became more obvious. Quick, before the Celtics have completely besieged the city, send someone to Dublin for help. In this way, in the end, we can only count on the governor to send someone. Sir John sighed. rubbed his brow, and thought silently. The people in the castle were thrilled to wait for a day, but the group of Celts did not attack the city. Instead, they built a camp in a decent manner, which looked like a regular army. The next day, Lord Jazz went to the city wall in person to cheer up the soldiers and take a look at how the Celts' offensive was going. A plume of smoke rose from the Celtic camp, as if to show the people in the castle that they had no shortage of food. Thinking about it, the Celts are not all tribes, and most of them live on farming and animal husbandry. In the fertile land of Ireland, the land is vast and sparsely populated, so how can they be short of food? Not long after the smoke rose, in less than half an hour, a team of more than 1,000 people approached the castle gently, bringing a bit of depression to the castle. Sir John looked through the binoculars and found that most of them were old, weak, sick and disabled, and they knew at a glance that they were sent to die, that is, to test the troops. Tell everyone, wait for my order before acting, and don't do it privately. Sir John turned his head and ordered aside. The army commander immediately agreed. As the team gradually approached, the soldiers on the city wall became more and more nervous, and Sir John clenched his fists. The archers were allowed only when the probing troops were 100 steps away from the castle, and the sword rain was thrown down after 3 throws. There were less than 400 people standing under the city wall. The 400 people looked up with bewildered faces, and then ran back with their heads buried in their legs, losing any consciousness of continuing to attack. And the unshaven man who commanded the Celtic army ignored the feelings of these soldiers, once again filling up 1,000 old, weak, sick and disabled, and continued to move forward. As a result, this time he retreated and returned in defeat, seeing the corners of the other tribal leaders' mouths twitching, feeling extremely distressed. Boss O'Hara, we can't go on like this. On the side, a big man with braids all over his head, wearing rough linen clothes, yelled with distressed face. The other tribal leaders around him also nodded and shouted, and the originally peaceful camp immediately became noisy again. Everyone, I am the leader of the tribal alliance today. This is unanimously recognized by everyone. You have also sworn before God. My orders must not be disobeyed. This tall man with a particularly burly body and tattoos on his arms glanced at the troublemaker leader like a knife. His eyes were extremely sharp, as if he wanted to eat someone, and he declared loudly, everyone, today is different from before. The English have occupied our homeland, and we have no way to retreat. The tribe and the land will be swallowed up by those devils. This is our last counterattack and our only chance. If we fail, the consequences will be disastrous. So, if anyone still doubts my decision, I will chop him with an axe immediately. As he spoke, the big man slashed at a chair with an axe, and the chair fell apart. The moment the axe fell, all the leaders were startled and felt chills all over. They believed that this #1 warrior of the Celts would definitely do what he said. I drank too much yesterday. Sorry. Chapter 423. The Despair of the Irish. The next day, the Celts used a test team of 3,000 people. After dropping more than 1,000 corpses, they retreated in a panic, ending the day's fighting in this way. Although the soldiers are all very happy, they look forward to the next war. But Sir John was not happy. The smell of temptation here was too strong. Even if he repelled, there was nothing to be happy about. Sure enough, on the 3rd day, the Celtics gave everyone in the castle a big one. On this day, the sun concealed half of the face from the sky, and the morning dew wet the collars of the soldiers on guard. When the cool wind blew, they felt chilly and shivered, but no one dared to slack off. Outside the castle, tens of thousands of troops were neatly staying in the camp, staring at each other. A slight loophole could deal a devastating blow to the castle, and no mistakes could be tolerated. The soldiers standing guard felt that the castle was slightly shaken. Looking forward, an endless black phalanx slowly approached. At the front, 5 siege vehicles brazenly announced to them that the real war was coming soon. The news spread throughout the entire castle, and everyone climbed onto the wall. Watching this scalp-numbing moment, Sir John looked at the 5 siege engines. His face changed drastically, and his face was full of hatred. Attention everyone, shoot me. The people near the siege engine, shoot hard. Tens of thousands of people could not line up in front of the castle, but surrounded the entire castle, as if looking for its weak point. However, the siege engine came directly to the city gate and attacked wantonly. Zutao. However, for each one, there were 2 or 3 screaming Celtic warriors, brandishing stone axes or spears, stepping on the corpses of their predecessors, rushing up one after another. Soon, in less than half an hour, 5 heavy siege vehicles arrived at the city wall. On the arrow towers on the siege vehicles, the Celtic archers also looked at the soldiers on the city wall at the same level, and took away arrow after arrow. Take the lives of soldiers so, This annoyed Sir John very much. He made people shoot the siege vehicles and the arrow tower at the same time. For a moment, the soldiers on the entire city wall became a little flustered. Finally, the arrow tower was shot, but Sir John found that those celts had followed the siege engine and climbed up the city wall step by step. Although there were only a few sporadic ones, however, the power of role models is infinite. Those celts tried to climb the city wall against the rain of arrows with the spirit of not fearing death. If viewed from the outside, a series of human-shaped echelons have formed and are continuously climbing upwards. Under the city wall, more people are gathered and lined up. It can be said that a person who climbs up the city wall may not necessarily die if he falls down, because there are several people helplessly paving the way below him. It can be predicted that if no measures are taken next, it is only a matter of time before the fortress is captured. Seeing such a scene, Sir John was taken aback, and his whole body felt a little bad. Quickly, everyone stand up for me. Hold up. Jazz shouted loudly. Quickly, let the musketeers come out and let them support. The messengers faithfully fulfilled their duties, and within a short while, 300 musketeers came to the crowded city wall with neat steps. The soldiers moved away one after another, exposing the group of brave and invincible Celts who climbed the city wall to the side of the musketeers with an order. The muskets fired together, followed by a puff of thick smoke, and then most of the Celtics who climbed the city wall fell down in an instant. The rest of the people didn't have the slightest sense of shrinking back, but yelled words they didn't understand, and rushed towards the musketeers. Immediately afterwards, the first row retreated. The second row moved forward, fired, and fired again. This time, the remaining Celts finally fell down, and at the moment when everyone breathed a sigh of relief, hundreds of people climbed up again. As a result, the musketeers started a new round of shooting, and the entire city wall was suddenly filled with smoke, making it difficult to breathe in this way. On the third day, a tug-of-war began on the city wall, and it was very difficult to fight in the evening. When the Celtics finally withdrew their troops, everyone on the city wall exhaled heavily and patted their chests with emotion. But Sir John didn't care about taking a break. Instead, he led his people around the entire city wall to boost morale. By the way, don't worry, we will definitely win. In a few days, the reinforcements will arrive. Persevere. Think about your family. They are in the city. For them, you must persevere. Just a few words, Sir John said back and forth. The tour was over, and it was already 9 o'clock in the evening. He was almost paralyzed on the seat, gasping for breath from exhaustion, then swallowed the bread in big gulps, and took a sip of hot soup. Regardless of his image, and he felt a little more relaxed. Fortunately, there is no shortage of food in the castle, otherwise it would be really difficult. Sir, how many days will our gunpowder and arrows last? He took a breath, and then he asked his ordnance officer. My lord, this is exactly what I want to say. Today, we have consumed 1/3 of the arrows and half of the gunpowder. If we continue today's intensity, we will last for 3 days at most. The weekly output of the workshops in the city is only enough for today's consumption. My lord, please be restrained. Sir John smiled at his ordnance officer's words. He wanted to be restrained. Who would have expected that the Kate would be so fierce that they would force the musketeers out on the first day, completely breaking his plan? Sir, you are an ordnance officer, and you should know a lot about various weapons. So, do you have any countermeasures against siege vehicles? Today, what impresses Sir John is the 5 siege engines, which are simply siege weapons and make him miserable. The ordnance officer had a thoughtful expression on his stiff face, and after thinking for a while, he finally took on a tinge of joy. My lord, there are still 20 barrels of strong fire wine stored in the warehouse. When it burns, the fire will be very strong, enough to burn those siege vehicles. After being reminded, Sir John's face immediately became happy, and then showed bitterness. What should I do if I run out of wine? The next day, under the strange eyes of the soldiers, Sir John brought in 20 barrels of wine, and the aroma of the wine immediately overflowed the city wall, causing everyone's noses to twitch. Then, 5 siege vehicles arrived as promised. Under the eyes of the soldiers, Sir John ordered people to pour wine on the siege vehicles, and 20 barrels of wine were completely spilled. The Celts below thought it was raining, but when they raised their heads, what fell into their mouths was wine, a high concentration of wine, and a smile suddenly appeared on their faces, and the siege vehicle was finally completely soaked. The savages whimpered and rolled in their drinks with joy. Seeing this, Sir John sneered, and dozens of torches fell down in an instant. All the siege vehicles were on fire, and the fire was so fierce that the Kate people around them couldn't avoid it, and those who were covered in alcohol also burned, screaming and running on the ground. Pulling innocent people from time to time, wanting him to save themselves unexpectedly. With one infection, dozens of people were on fire, but hundreds of people were on fire, and the miserable screams sounded numb after burning for more than an hour. These siege vehicles were completely burned, leaving only a few ashes. Seeing such a scene, Sir John finally realized that there are still so many ways to defend the city, so he raised his posture. So, after returning to London, Sir John wrote a diary of his conquest in Ireland, and solemnly introduced the function of fire attack and strong fire wine not only for drinking, but also for killing enemies. Not only did he become an authority in defending the city, but he also accidentally made the sales of the strong fire wine to a higher level. Next, with the destruction of the siege engine, Sir John, who persisted for a week, finally waited for reinforcements of 5,000 people, defeating the Irish's final counterattack. Since then, the Irish have no choice but to accept the rule of the Tudor royal family. Chapter 424 Merchant. At a time when Ireland is engaged in a protracted colonial war, Our Majesty the King is working on reforming the law with the development of commerce in the United Kingdom, especially the development of the textile industry. Various factories were born and merged continuously, contributing more and more taxes. It must be said that the bourgeoisie at this time is actually the aristocratic class. Those large-scale and heavy factories, if they do not have aristocratic background, can hardly escape the fate of being eaten away. Gangsters will ask for protection money, officials will take bribes, workers will also look down on factory owners. And laziness and stealing cannot be avoided. Only those family workshops with no noble background and a few people will survive. And businessmen, no, nobles, have always been the most diligent and serious when it comes to their own interests. For example, at this time, on Edward's desk, there were several legal bills submitted by the joint parliament. Proposals on business among them, they called for a ban on the export of primary industrial raw materials such as hemp, wool, and flax, and tax breaks for the textile industry. Prohibiting the export of raw materials is to control the stability of domestic raw material prices, avoid the impact of foreign raw material markets, give priority to satisfying their production, and prevent stockouts, so that they can continue to maintain high profits. From the perspective of the country, this is a typical example of shearing the wool of agriculture to fertilize business. However, in this era when commerce has already determined the destiny of the country, such a sacrifice is meaningful. Wait for the moment when commerce develops stronger, and then make up for it. However, if the ban is too rough and the trade protection is too obvious, it is more appropriate to change the ban to a restriction. As for tax cuts, that's out of the question. You have made so much money by selling things, and instead of thinking about how to contribute more to the country, you want to earn more, which is unreasonable. Is 30% tax much? Compared with other countries, it is simply a price of conscience, and it cannot be more important for business. Moreover, after the Reformation, almost all the exorbitant and miscellaneous taxes levied by the churches were exempted, which relieved more than a few layers of burden for the development of commerce. I'm ashamed to ask for tax cuts. Edward can't wait to slap their mouths to death. Then, in order to highlight and support business, more imports of raw materials should be encouraged, and appropriate tax rates should be reduced for these raw materials. Although this will impact the domestic agricultural material market, it is also a necessity for commercial development. After Edward added some of his own comments, he asked the Secretariat to polish the document, and the document was transferred to the joint parliament. After the United Parliament agrees, it will be drafted together with the Supreme United Court, and then handed over to the United Central Government for reading, and they will be notified, and then His Majesty the King will seal it and promulgate it nationwide. Thus, a law was formally formed. And the next time Edward will meet a businessman, a big businessman in London, before introducing him, let me talk about the commercial system of the United Kingdom. The monopoly, as the name suggests, it is to monopolize the right to sell a business. This is also the birthright of the royal family. For example, the Tudor royal family has monopoly rights on hundreds of thousands of commodities, and the royal family transfers these monopoly rights to certain businessmen to obtain benefits every year. The soap-making alum alone provides the royal family with an income of thousands of pounds. But why does the royal family have no money? Because these monopoly rights have been sold out in a few years or decades, and some of them have been foreclosed on or rewarded to certain nobles. Now the annual income is like a trickle, which is only tens of thousands of pounds. For example, Edward rewarded Princess Elizabeth with the exclusive right of alum as her annuity, allowing her to spend freely. There are also some monopoly rights that were abolished by the Parliament when the aristocracy was powerful and the royal power was small. For example, during the bourgeois revolution during the Cromwell period, hundreds of royal monopoly rights were abolished. After the abolition, in modern times, the royal family has very little power, and these interests, to some extent, have hindered the development of business. For example, a certain silk association has obtained the king's privileged approval letter, which only allows this silk association to sell silk in London, and other merchants and associations are not allowed to trade silk. That is to say, the king sold the management rights of London silk to obtain a certain income, and then the government collected taxes from their profits to obtain another income. It is impossible for businessmen to suffer losses, and they can also make money then, only the consumers will suffer among them. The most famous is the East India Company, that everyone has heard about. The king and the government only allowed this company to operate trade between India and the East, and other companies were not allowed to operate without authorization. Speaking of this, everyone will understand why the big capitalists are not nobles, but people with noble backgrounds. Ordinary people want to obtain monopoly rights. Wishful thinking, therefore, close to the water and land first benefited from the moon, and London businessmen benefited from the geographical location and became the beneficiary group of the monopoly, thus making London the largest city in the United Kingdom. This is also the reason why other autonomous cities succumbed so easily after Edward seized the autonomy of London. The boss all knelt down, let alone the younger brother. Next, the businessman introduced can also be called the royal businessman. Thomas Gratian, his father, Richard Gratian, was Henry VIII's royal merchant, and he inherited his father's position and continued to serve the royal family. The so-called imperial merchants are the financial agents of the king's government, who borrow money for the king, manage money, and carry out foreign loan work. Of course, there are many royal merchants, and almost all London merchants can be counted as royal merchants. Most of the administrators of customs duties and mint officials were appointed by royal merchants, who used their knowledge of international currencies, markets and foreign trade to serve the king's government. And Thomas Gratian is the largest royal businessman historically. This businessman was the elder of the three dynasties, and was the chief merchant of the three monarchs, Edward VI, Queen Mary, and Elizabeth I. Thomas Gratian joined the Silk Merchants Guild and the Adventurer Company in 1543, and was elected as the president of the Silk Merchants Guild in 1553, 1560. 1570 and 1579, and was hailed as the king of merchants by the people at that time. Thomas Gratian, who was in his 20s this year, looked very energetic. His long black hair was combed meticulously, his aquiline nose, green eyes, and tough body made Edward have a good impression of him. Your Majesty, his voice was strong. Mr. Gratian, I have invited you here this time because I need your help. Edward looked into his eyes and said seriously, could it be that His Majesty is short of money? What kind of monopoly do I want this time? As soon as the king's voice fell, Gratian had a lot of thoughts in his mind. God is so pitiful. Since he became a royal businessman in 1551, the king has never borrowed money again, which directly made him lose a lot of money. Your Majesty, do you need to borrow money? How much? Gratian asked impatiently, his eyes wide. No, I need you to go to Flanders. Chapter 425. The Panic of the Dutch. Flanders is a historical place name in Western Europe, including East Flanders and West Flanders in Belgium, Pas-de-Calais and Noord in France, and Zeeland in the Netherlands. In the 16th century, Flanders generally referred to the southern part of the ancient Netherlands, located in the southwestern part of the Western European lowlands, on the coast of the North Sea. The Netherlands is a very economically developed area in Western Europe. At this time, it has a population of 3 million, and there are more than 300 cities in 17 provinces. Antwerp in the south is the center of international trade, and Amsterdam is the economic center in the north. Here, since ancient times, trade has been prevalent, and it is also the richest place in the European continent, and it is also a treasure land that all countries dream of. The Habsburg family controlled it and made it their own pocket, continuously contributing to the Habsburg dynasty. Annual taxation accounts for half of the fiscal revenue of the Habsburg dynasty. With the accession of Philip II, this devout Catholic finally revealed his anger towards heresy with the actions of the Spanish Regional Inquisition. All Protestants, Christians, suffered a major blow, and Catholicism reasserted its authority in Philip II. With the victory of the Italian War in the religious repression, established his domestic prestige, and those old nobles had to succumb to his subordinates and obey his orders. In this way, he turned his attention to the Netherlands, especially Flanders, a region that is so rich that he absolutely cannot tolerate being taken over by Protestantism. Not only to maintain the Catholic faith, but also to consolidate his rule, he finally stretched out his claws to the Netherlands. First, he sent his new governor to the Netherlands for religious action. Historically, during the time of Charles V, The number of Protestants who were persecuted reached more than 50,000, and people were already complaining at this time. The new governor was a woman. The governor is Marguerite, Duchess of Parma. She was the illegitimate daughter of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. She was raised by Charles V's aunt, Archduchess Margaret of Austria, and sister, Queen Marie of Hungary. These two ladies are outstanding women. Successively served as the governor of the Netherlands, Margaret 1507 to 1530, Mary 1530 to 1555, guarding the most affluent territory for the Habsburg family, is an outstanding political home. Therefore, Margaret was placed high hopes by Philip II to let her own sister continue to guard the Netherlands after the female governor took office. Although she treated people softly and sympathized with the suffering of the Dutch people, she still carried out her brother's orders without hesitation. As a result, the Inquisition prevailed throughout the Netherlands, and all the Protestants were panicked and uneasy. Business has been affected, and it is much more depressed than in the past under the coercion of the new governor. The atmosphere in the Netherlands seemed a little uneasy at this time. Thomas Gratian took a boat and came to the trade center, Antwerp, as soon as he got off the boat. Jellison felt that although the whole city was still prosperous in business, it made people feel uncomfortable. Hans, what happened in the Netherlands recently? Sitting in the carriage, looking at the nervous passers-by outside the carriage, Gilshan couldn't help asking the person in charge of his family in Antwerp. As one of the few wool merchants in the United Kingdom, especially in the Netherlands, which has close ties with England, Jellison certainly arranged some people to take care of the business. Sir, a trustworthy female governor came to the Netherlands recently. She hates heretics. Although the methods are not drastic, they still have a great impact. Look at the passers-by on the road, and you are always worried about being caught by a monk who suddenly appeared. How can you be interested in doing business? The supervisor, who stayed behind, pointed at the pedestrian with a sad face, shook his head, and said helplessly, "N." Seeing such a scene, Gil's confidence in completing the task doubled in his heart. Boris was a craftsman, a weaver, so to speak. He was over 40 years old, and originally wanted to go home and retire, guard his previous savings, buy a grocery store, and spend his retirement leisurely. Unexpectedly, after the tyrant conducted the Inquisition in Spain and expelled and persecuted a large number of Protestants, he extended his claws to the Netherlands. The new female governor faithfully carried out the order of the tyrant, and implemented a series of prohibition and persecution policies against Protestants, which made everyone feel insecure, and even he trembled a little when he usually did things looking around. There were fewer and fewer pedestrians on the street, and it was getting dark. I had to go home quickly, otherwise it would be bad if something happened. Boris hurriedly speeded up and returned to his home. However, what surprised him was that his mother-in-law did not greet him at the door, which made Boris a little angry. He worked so hard for the family, but he didn't understand anything. As soon as he stepped into the house, Boris' first reaction was that the house was so bright, and his second reaction was, "Who is this person?" I saw that in his home, in his place, sat a well-dressed gentleman, followed by two subordinates, and his wife, who was sitting a little timidly, lowered her head. "Well, this gentleman, do you know why you are here?" Boris was taken aback for a moment, then a smile appeared on his face, and he said in a low voice, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Boris, a senior weaver?" Jellison, who was sitting on a chair, smiled kindly and asked, "Of course, do you have any orders?" When Boris heard that he was looking for him, he was about to deny it, but when he saw the old wife shrunk in the chair, he sighed and agreed simply, "We're here to find you." As he said that, Jellison hinted with his eyes, and the guard on the side took out a money bag, revealing the glittering gold coins inside. "Here are 50 gold coins, please come with us." Jellison's voice was very friendly, but his words were very domineering. "Where are you going?" Boris asked involuntarily. "England." Gilshan said habitually. "Let me think again." Boris glanced at the gold coin, swallowed his saliva, and said tremblingly, "As a senior weaver, it would take him 5 years to accumulate without eating or drinking," and the temptation was too great. Seeing that the effect of the gold coin offensive was not obvious, Jellison immediately persuaded, "Mr. Boris, even if it's not for gold coins, for your wife, for the family of your married daughter, you should leave the Netherlands. Think about it, Your Majesty. The King hates Protestantism very much. This year's new governor has proved this. Next, I think the situation of the Netherlands and Spain will not be far off." Boris shuddered at the thought that his family would be persecuted and tried like the Spanish Protestants. Considering that England is also a Protestant country, it should be much better than the Netherlands. With one last glance at the gold coin, Boris made up his mind. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.